Wie wird er sich entscheiden?
Also auch wenn alle im Moment vermuten, dass er das ablehnen wird, eine weitere Abstimmung, glaube ich, dass es doch auch gute Gründe dafür gibt. Um das nochmal zu vergegenwärtigen, um den Brexit-Deal durchs Parlament zu bringen, sind 2 Schritte notwendig. Das eine ist eine politische Willenserklärung des Unterhauses. Damit rechnen wir jetzt. Und das andere sind dann Gesetze, die das in Rechtsform übertragen. Also nicht einfach nur eine politische Willenserklärung.
Der also ein technischer Akt dann sozusagen.
Ja, das sind aber also natürlich nicht nur technisch, sondern das sind natürlich gewichtige Fragen. Denn also all das, was beschlossen worden ist, muss dann ja in britisches Recht übertragen werden. Und die Abgeordneten haben jetzt schon angekündigt, dass sie auch in diesem Gesetzgebungsverfahren wieder zusätzliche Anträge stellen wollen, zum Beispiel auf ein weiteres Referendum, zum Beispiel auf eine ganz andere Beziehung zur Europäischen Union, als das jetzt ausgehandelt worden ist. Also der Prozess war politische Willenserklärung und dann Gesetzgebung. Wenn man diese Abstimmung, die politische Abstimmung, jetzt immer weiter nach hinten schiebt, dann stellt man das Ganze vom Kopf auf die Füße. Dann würde also zuerst dieses Gesetzgebungsverfahren laufen und am Ende würde die politische Abstimmung stehen. Das ergibt für mich eigentlich überhaupt keinen Sinn. Deswegen gäbe es auch ein Argument dafür zu sagen, ja, die Abgeordneten stimmen heute ab, erklären ihren Willen. Es gibt allerdings, glaube ich, eine entscheidende Voraussetzung dafür. Der Premierminister müsste vor dem Unterhaus erklären, dass er den Austritts oder seinen Antrag auf Verlängerung der Verhandlungen nicht zurückziehen wird, wenn die Abgeordneten heute zustimmen. Denn das war ja die Sorge am Samstag, dass man nicht genug Zeit hat, auch für das Gesetzgebungsverfahren. Und die Sorge der Opposition heute, wenn der Speaker stattgibt einer solchen Debatte und Abstimmung, ist, dass Boris Johnson dann nach Brüssel geht und sagt, ja, also alles wieder zurück auf los. Das Unterhaus hat zugestimmt, wir brauchen gar keine Verlängerung. Nein, die Verlängerung ist notwendig, weil das Gesetzgebungsverfahren dann noch käme.
Stellt sich natürlich aber die Frage, ob damit das, was zwischen der EU und Johnson ausgehandelt wurde, dann wiederum von London teilweise ja anders gestaltet wird durch das Gesetzgebungsverfahren. Ne?
Absolut. Und deswegen wäre es noch absurder, wenn man, also wir stellen uns mal vor, der Speaker sagt gleich, keine Debatte, keine Abstimmung. Morgen bringt die Regierung in zweiter Lesung das Rückzugsgesetz ein. Dann beginnt also die eigentliche Gesetzgebung. Dann ist die erste Abstimmung, dann geht das in die Ausschüsse, dann können Änderungsanträge eingebracht werden von den Abgeordneten. Also jetzt stellen wir uns mal vor, die Abgeordneten würden einen Änderungsantrag annehmen. Wir wollen künftig nicht nur ein Freihandelsabkommen, wie das ausgehandelt ist, sondern eine Zollunion. Das ist immerhin möglich. Und viele Labour-Abgeordnete und auch einige der Tories, der moderaten Tories, wollen das. Dann hätten wir also schon eine Veränderung des Deals im Gesetzgebungsverfahren. Und am Ende des Gesetzgebungsverfahrens müsste dann der Speaker eine Abstimmung aufrufen über das, was letzte Woche ausgehandelt worden ist und was dann ja schon überholt worden ist von der Gesetzgebung. Also wir kommen in ein wirklich absurdes
Da sind wir ja schon die ganze Zeit in Absurditäten.
Dem kann ich nicht widersprechen. Ja.
Das ist wirklich eines der, ich finde, seltsamsten politischen Vorgehen, die ich persönlich je erlebt habe, mit seinen ständigen Weiterungen, Irrungen und Wirrungen. Wir blicken noch mal nach London, sehen, dass da die Debatte noch läuft. Es ist eine andere Debatte zu einem anderen Thema. Und sobald sich John Bercow äußert, werden wir sofort live nach London geben. Der Saal füllt sich ein wenig, aber es geht scheinbar noch zu einem anderen Thema. Wir müssen jetzt so fragen, wenn das heute nicht abgestimmt wird, wird es dann wann anders abgestimmt?
Ja, es muss abgestimmt werden. Dieses Meaningful Vote, wie die Abgeordneten das nennen, also dieses bedeutungsvolle Votum, haben sich die Abgeordneten erkämpft gegen die Regierung von Theresa May. Die Regierung von Theresa May hat gesagt, okay, wir verhandeln ein Rückzugsabkommen und eine politische Erklärung über die Zukunft. Ja, und dann machen wir Gesetzgebung und dann können die Abgeordneten sich dazu verhalten. Da hat das Unterhaus gesagt und hat das vor Gericht durchgefochten.
Jetzt weiß ich nicht, äußert er sich jetzt? Wir sehen John Bercow, Entschuldigung, dass ich Sie unterbrochen habe. Wir würden da mal drauf gehen.
Hier ist ein Antrag zur Geschäftsordnung gestellt worden. Die Regierung hat die Absicht, heute einen Antrag zu stellen, entsprechend 31b des Austrittsabkommens von 2018. Leider ist es so, dass dieser Geschäftsordnungsantrag keine Vorstufe war zu einem Antrag, wo die Kollegen dann nachfragen können. Ungefähr eine Stunde lang sind dann rund 30 verschiedene Geschäftsordnungsanträge gestellt worden von 24 Kollegen. Darin ist Bestürzung geäußert worden darüber, dass die Regierung vom Unterhaus verlangt, am Montag erneut über die gleiche Frage zu debattieren, die vor 48 Stunden schon erörtert worden war, an dem vorangegangenen Sitzungstag. Ich habe dazugehört und ich habe reagiert auf die Standpunkte der Kollegen und habe mich dann verpflichtet, weiter darüber nachzudenken, was die Abgeordneten ausgeführt hatten und heute Nachmittag zu entscheiden. Und das werde ich nun tun. Es geht um zwei Fragen. Eine substanzielle Frage und eine Frage, die sich aus den Umständen ergibt. Und diese Fragen müssen geprüft werden. Ich möchte nacheinander beide Fragen ansprechen. Zuerst einmal habe ich zu beurteilen, ob der Antrag nach 31.1b des Textes von 2018 substanziell identisch ist mit dem am Samstag vorgelegten Text. Auf der entsprechenden Seite in Erskine May steht, dass ein solcher Antrag nicht in der gleichen Session erneut vorgelegt werden darf. Ebenso ist es klar, dass eine Entscheidung über derartige Fälle eine Angelegenheit des Vorsitzenden ist. Ich habe Erskine May zitiert und darüber entschieden. Das war im März, am 18. März dieses Jahres. Da habe ich darüber schon befunden. Der Antrag vom Samstag wollte Zustimmung erreichen für das Austrittsabkommen, für die politische Erklärung über die künftigen Beziehungen zwischen der EU und dem Vereinigten Königreich und die Erklärung über die Sicherung der demokratischen Zustimmung in der Nordirland-Frage. Heute geht es um die Zustimmung zum Austrittsabkommen zur politischen Erklärung über die künftigen Beziehungen zwischen der EU und dem Vereinigten Königreich und die Erklärung über die Durchführung der demokratischen Willensbildung in Nordirland entsprechend den Vorgaben. Es ist klar, dass die Anträge substanziell die gleichen sind. Allerdings ist diese Frage vor weniger als 49 Stunden entschieden worden, nach mehr als dreistündiger Debatte. Das Unterhaus hat dort mit 322 zu 306 Stimmen für den Antrag von Sir Oliver Letwin sich ausgesprochen, wo es heißt, das Parlament hat die Angelegenheit geprüft, behält sich aber vor, nicht zuzustimmen, solange nicht eine Umsetzungsgesetzgebung beschlossen worden ist zur Durchführung des Ganzen. Zweitens hatte ich zu prüfen, ob irgendwelche Umstände sich verändert haben, die es rechtfertigen, am Montag hier im Unterhaus erneut über das nachzudenken, was am Samstag beschlossen worden war. Auf den ersten Blick ist es so, wenn nicht ein außerhalb des Unterhauses eintretendes Ereignis eingetreten ist, es mir schwerfällt, eine deutliche Veränderung der Umstände festzustellen, die eine Neuprüfung am nächsten Sitzungstag rechtfertigen würde. In diesem Fall ist eine erneute Prüfung, die vom Leader des Unterhauses angekündigt worden ist, 21 Minuten nachdem das Ergebnis der Abstimmung entschieden worden ist. Die Regierung könnte allerdings argumentieren, obwohl sie bisher sich nicht in dieser Form geäußert hat, überhaupt nichts unterbreitet hat, dass die Änderung der Umstände darin besteht, dass der Premierminister am Samstagabend eine Verlängerung von Artikel 50 beantragt hat. Das ist aber nicht überzeugend. Das ist nicht überzeugend. Der Antrag ist Teil eines ganzen Prozesses, nicht ein bedeutsames Einzelereignis. Zusammenfassend lasse ich kann ich hier feststellen, ich bin immer sehr dankbar, wenn ich nicht unterbrochen werde. Ich fahre fort. Zusammenfassend kann ich festhalten, dass der heutige Antrag substanziell der gleiche ist wie der Antrag vom Samstag und das Unterhaus hat in dieser Angelegenheit bereits entschieden. Die heutigen Umstände sind substanziell die gleichen wie die vom Samstag. Dementsprechend entscheide ich, dass der Antrag heute nicht erörtert wird, da es eine bloße Wiederholung wäre und nicht angebracht wäre, so zu verfahren. Für die Kollegen, die nicht im Detail vertraut sind mit dieser Regelung über gleiche Fragen, das ist eindeutig und geht zurück auf das Jahr 1604. Für diese Kollegen möchte ich die Begründung in einem einzigen Satz wiederholen. Es ist eine notwendige Vorschrift dafür zu sorgen, dass die Zeit des Unterhauses sinnvoll genutzt wird. Es geht um die angemessene Achtung für die dort getroffenen Entscheidungen. Wenn es nicht gerechtfertigt ist, diesen Antrag heute vorzulegen, was kann die Regierung dann tun? Die Antwort lautet, der Premierminister hat es ja selbst deutlich gemacht in seinem Geschäftsordnungsantrag vom Samstag, in 625 und in seinem Schreiben an die Abgeordneten an dem Abend, dass die Regierung also in der Tat das Austrittsgesetz der Regierung unterbreiten kann und vorlegen kann. Und genau das ist ja auch geschehen. Der Gesetzentwurf ist in erster Lesung heute unterbreitet worden. Ich zweifle nicht daran, dass wir weitere Einzelheiten dazu erfahren werden, wie es mit der Zeitplanung für diesen Gesetzentwurf aussieht, wenn wir heute später dazu mehr von ihm hören. Ich hoffe inzwischen, dass diese Entscheidung mit den gegebenen Erläuterungen dem Unterhaus weiterhelfen. Ruhe bitte. Zur Geschäftsordnung. Danke, Mr. Speaker. Ich kann der Logik Ihrer Darlegungen völlig folgen. Aber welche Bedeutung hat dabei folgender Aspekt? Als wir am Samstag debattiert hatten, wusste niemand, ob der Premierminister ein Schreiben versenden würde oder nicht, ob er das tun würde. Das wussten wir nicht. Da er einen Brief abgeschickt hat, haben Sie da mit Recht festgestellt, dass der Antrag identisch ist? Ein externes Ereignis hat das doch geändert. Und da der Antrag vom Samstag eindeutig sagt, dass eine endgültige Entscheidung erst erfolgen kann, wenn das Abkommen durch ist, dann wäre es doch, so wie Sie immer gesagt haben, sinnvoll, wenn das Parlament hier entscheiden könnte. Unbeschadet des Umstandes, dass der letzte Antrag ja darauf eingegangen ist, was geschehen würde. Unser Land muss doch wissen, ob das Unterhaus zustimmt oder dagegen ist, was der Premierminister unterbreitet hat. Ich bin dankbar für diesen Antrag zur Geschäftsordnung. Ich möchte folgendermaßen darauf antworten. Ich bin bei der Beurteilung dieser Frage nicht danach gegangen, ob ein Schreiben versandt werden würde. Das Schreiben ist ergangen, der Brief ist abgeschickt worden am Samstagabend. Aber es geht eher auch generell um die Frage, ob der Vorsitzende zu prüfen hat, ob ein Minister der Krone dem Recht folgt. War das eine ehrliche Antwort? Ich hoffe schon. Dieser Aspekt ist mir nicht als sinnvoll erschienen bei meinen Überlegungen über diese Frage. Ich stelle fest, was der Abgeordnete gerade ausgeführt hat und sehe das auch als Standpunkt an und möchte auch gar nicht unhöflich werden, wenn ich hier erkläre, dass ich das Argument doch deutlich gemacht habe. Ich habe auch begründet, wie ich es sehe und weshalb ich dieses Urteil habe ergehen lassen. Ich möchte nicht gegen den Abgeordneten vorgehen, nicht negativ gemeint. Ich will nur darauf hinweisen, dass wir ja über alle Aspekte nachgedacht haben, die Interessen des Parlaments und so weiter, dass ich dementsprechend zu diesem genannten Schluss gekommen bin. Und die Kollegen hier im Saal, überall, Und auch der Abgeordnete hat natürlich einen Teil von dem, was hier dargelegt worden ist, nicht gemocht. Aber so ist das eben. Er hat aber auch gehört, welche Möglichkeit die Regierung noch hat, was sie noch tun kann. Die Regierung kann ihren Gesetzentwurf vorlegen. Sie kann auch ein Programm, einen Antrag zum Programm, das abgespult werden soll, vorlegen. Und das kann bis Ende des Monats alles gemacht werden. So wie das Parlament es ja als Kollektiv unterbreitet und vorschreibt. Ich komme zu den anderen Fragen, liebe Kollegen. Aber zuerst mal zur Geschäftsordnung.
I was the honourable member who raised the issue that the Leader of the House should have been making an emergency business statement at that time, rather than relying on the device of a point of order to try to change the business.
Anstatt einen Geschäftsordnungsantrag nachzugehen. Ich habe damals schon gesagt, dass das Ganze ja wichtig ist und statt jetzt hier Spielchen zu spielen, sollten wir die üblichen Praktiken anwenden und damit wir wirklich weitermachen können mit den wichtigen geschäftlichen Dingen, die wir alle zu tun haben. Meine werten Herren, konzentrieren wir uns jetzt bitte auf das Thema hier, auf die Fragestellung. Wie jemand schon mal gesagt hat, der sehr lang hier gedient hat, es geht hier nicht um Persönlichkeiten, es geht um Politik und ich möchte hier nicht auf die Persönlichkeit zu sprechen können. Und das Ganze ist eben kein Spielchen. Ich habe schon in der Vergangenheit gehört, wie das gesagt wurde, auch in der Kammer. Auch da haben Sie darauf Bezug genommen. Aber ich möchte mich nicht auf diese Dinge konzentrieren. Was ich sagen möchte, ist, dass dieser Präzedenzfall, was jetzt die Veränderung von Geschäftsordnungsanträgen angeht, das ist nicht die Norm, aber es gibt Präzedenzfälle. Und ich möchte niemandem jetzt irgendetwas unterstellen. Wir haben immer ein sehr freundliches Verhältnis gehabt und ich hoffe, dass ich da auch mich entsprechend verhalten habe. Und das Statement, was er abgegeben hat, hat er getan und das war sehr offensichtlich, aber das war vielleicht auch den Umständen geschuldet. Vielleicht hätte man die Umstände antizipieren können, das ist wohl angenommen worden, aber wir waren, wo wir waren. Das ist nun mal so. Und ich bedauere es gar nicht, wenn ich auf Geschäftsordnungsanträge antworten muss. Also ich weiß, dass der Kollege sich sehr, sehr vertraut gemacht hat mit allen Fragen, die diesen Antrag betreffen. Nun, also der Geschäftsordnungsantrag vom Kollegen hier. Die Geschäftsordnungsanträge, die ich vor einigen Tagen eingereicht habe, da habe ich gesagt, dass das Recht des Landes vorsieht, dass das Austrittsabkommen 2018 vorsieht, und zwar auch den European Community Act, und dass der dann eben zurückgezogen wird am 31. Oktober 2018. Der BAN Act, da steht nichts anderes drin, beziehungsweise nichts anderes passiert, außer diesen Brief, von dem wir gesprochen haben. Deshalb würde ich doch sagen, und das möchte ich Ihnen vorlegen, dass die Frage, wie Sie gesagt haben, dass es Fragestellungen gibt, ob dem Gesetz Folge geleistet werden oder nicht, dass es darum überhaupt nicht geht zum jetzigen Punkt der Prozedur. Wäre es denn möglich für Sie, dass Sie Ihre Entscheidung noch mal überdenken? Weil ich glaube, dass die Realität des Landes ein ganz anderes ist und dass sich die Situation verändert hat im Land seit Freitag. Der Kollege ist ein Rechtsanwalt und das möchte ich hier noch mal ganz deutlich anerkennen, auch in Bezug auf sein Statement. Ich glaube nicht, dass das Ganze jetzt, als ich gesagt habe, dass der Kollege seine Darlegung oder sein Verständnis der Situation dargelegt habe, habe ich mich darauf bezogen, dass das auch bei anderen Gelegenheiten schon erfolgt ist. Andere Personen haben andere Meinungen zur rechtlichen Situation, auch in Bezug auf den sogenannten BAN Act. Wenn ich mich recht erinnere, habe ich in meinem Statement mich nicht länger darauf bezogen, wie es mit der Umsetzung des Gesetzes ist. Ich habe das ganz kurz mich darauf bezogen, nur um dem Kollegen hier, dem Herrn Fellenberg, zu beantworten. Ich verstehe, was der Gentleman hier denkt und warum ich das auch noch mal sehr deutlich gemacht habe, dass es offene Optionen gibt, die der Regierung offen stehen. Und das habe ich geantwortet in Bezug auf Wellenborough. Die Änderungsanträge, also nicht nur die Mitglieder, sondern auch diejenigen, die beigewohnt haben, in Bezug auf Sir Ledwin, spezifiziert ganz klar, dass die Gesetzgebung zunächst kommen muss, erfolgen muss. Und zwar beim nächsten Sitzungstag werden wir das Ganze besprechen. Und danach, und dazu wurden Schlussfolgerungen gemacht am Samstag. Und das schien doch sehr ungewöhnlich zu sein. Und ich bin zu dem Urteil gekommen, zu dem ich gekommen bin. Das ist doch sehr offensichtlich. Wenn man diese Dinge beurteilt, dann ist es doch klar, wenn es eine Kontroverse ist, dann freuen sich einige Leute darüber, andere sind nicht so sehr angetan. Das hat mit meiner Verantwortung zu tun. Ich habe einfach nur versucht, meiner Verantwortung gerecht zu werden und das vorgebracht, von dem ich glaube, dass es richtig ist. Und das obliegt mir in meiner Rolle und Aufgabe. Vielen Dank, Mr. Speaker. Mein Geschäftsordnungsantrag bezieht sich auf die Macht des Vorsitzenden, nämlich das Parlament, davor zu bewahren, immer und immer wieder über die gleiche Sache abzustimmen. Und da geht es natürlich auch darum, dass die Exekutive nicht versucht, bin nicht gut im Lippenlesen, aber ich glaube, dass ich hier etwas wahrgenommen habe. Aber die Dame hier darf bitte mal weitersprechen. Nämlich ein Versuch, sicherzustellen, dass eben nicht wieder und wieder gewählt wird bzw. abgestimmt wird. Und natürlich, Mr. Speaker, ist das natürlich eine Funktion der Verteidigung in unserer Demokratie. Und stimmen Sie mit mir überein, dass wenn wir derzeit eine Regierung haben, die versucht, das Parlament zu untergraben und auch ein falsches Narrativ verbreitet, dass das ganz wichtig ist, das zu vermeiden. Meine Antwort ist natürlich ja. Ich möchte mein Statement, meine Darlegung noch mal weiter erläutern und nochmal unterstreichen, dass das gut überlegt ist. Und ich möchte zu diesem Punkt nicht Stellung nehmen, aber der Vorsitzende ist der Meinung, dass das Parlament nicht fortwährend bombardiert werden sollte mit dem Anliegen, die gleiche Fragestellung wieder und wieder und wieder zu betrachten. Und es gibt Personen, die besorgt sind in Bezug auf diese Perspektive, dass Leute eingeschüchtert werden und so weiter. Und was jetzt den 18. März angeht, da ist mir bewusst, dass die Leute bringen, wir können auch 26 Mal darüber abstimmen, wenn es notwendig ist. Hauptsache, wir kommen zum Ergebnis. Und natürlich hat das meine Entscheidung auch beeinflusst. Und was jetzt diese Fragestellung angeht, die Convention, seit 1920 gibt es schon ähnliche Situationen. Es geht natürlich nicht um die Convention zu unterbrechen, sondern es geht darum, dass wir dem entsprechen. Und es geht darum, das Parlament zu schützen, das Unterhaus zu schützen. Und es geht eben darum, in Konflikten zu einem Konsens und zu einer Entscheidung zu kommen. Und dann wird das Ganze in der nächsten Sitzung weiter besprochen. Das ist die Überlegung, die dahinter stehen, und es wird möglicherweise nicht allen gefallen, aber so ist es.
Mr. Speaker. Ich glaube, das macht Ihnen ganz schön Spaß, hier so mit Bemerkungen bombardiert zu werden. Sie stehen natürlich vor einem Dilemma, immer wieder. Und manchmal müssen Sie den einen gefallen, manchmal anderen. Aber es ist schon erstaunlich, wie oft Sie einen Gefallen tun und andere nicht. Das finde ich bemerkenswert. Ich möchte noch folgenden Hinweis geben. Sie haben sich dagegen gewandt, dass hier ungewöhnliche Dinge im Unterhaus geschehen, die Ihnen nicht gefallen. Es ist aber doch ungewöhnlich, wenn ein Speaker die Regierung so sehr daran hindert, über Dinge eine Debatte führen zu lassen, die hier eine Rolle spielen. Das ist eines Ihrer Mantras, Mr. Speaker. Das Unterhaus soll doch seine Meinungen vortragen können, auch wenn meinetwegen Geschäftsordnungsanträge anders verstanden werden können. Sie haben dem Unterhaus die Möglichkeit verweigert, sich in dieser Frage so zu äußern. Dieser Antrag ist nämlich noch nie zur Abstimmung gelangt am Samstag. Das war doch nicht so. Der Redner muss das Wort haben, ob man nur dafür ist oder nicht. Und dann darf ich sicherlich hinterher auch darauf antworten. Bitte. Ja, dieser Antrag ist doch nie zur Abstimmung gelangt. Er hat doch zu existieren aufgehört, nachdem er geändert worden ist. Und ich bin überrascht, Mr. Speaker, dass jetzt der Kollege einen Änderungsantrag eingereicht hat und dass das anscheinend Ihnen nicht in den Kopf gedrungen ist. Das hat doch den Grund gehabt, dass hier die Befürchtung bestand, dass das Gesetz nicht beachtet werden könnte und das Schreiben nicht gehen könnte. Da hat sich dann doch etwas geändert mit dem Abschicken des Briefes. Und ich möchte auch Sie und das Unterhaus darauf hinweisen, dass mein Ausschuss die Rolle des Speakers, des Unterhausvorsitzenden zur Sprache bringen wird. Im Lichte der Erfahrungen der letzten Monate müssen wir darüber reden. Ich bin dem Abgeordneten dankbar dafür, dass er so vielschichtig das Thema Geschäftsordnungsantrag variiert hat. Das ist ja auch wichtig, diese Frage. Zweitens, folgender Hinweis. Ich habe gehört, was hier ausgeführt worden ist über seinen Ausschuss, der sich anschauen möchte, welche Rolle der Speaker hier im Unterhaus führt. Das ist ja alles in Ordnung, das kann er gerne machen. Dass also Zeugen gehört werden und so weiter, Stellungnahmen berücksichtigt werden, das darf alles gemacht werden. Ich denke nicht daran, das irgendwie negativ zu kommentieren. Ich werde schon gar nicht gegen solche Vorschriften und gegen die Autonomie von Ausschüssen dieses Unterhauses vorgehen wollen. Das ist alles völlig problemlos. Ich sehe darin ein Zeichen der Gewissenhaftigkeit des Abgeordneten, dass er eine solche Untersuchung anstrengen möchte. Drittens dann aber dem Abgeordneten Folgendes. Und einige hier im Unterhaus kennen ja die Wahrheit und wissen, dass ich die Wahrheit spreche, wenn ich hier so antworte, bei allem Respekt. Es ist natürlich anscheinend doch unglücklich, dass die eine Seite benachteiligt wird, wie es geheißen hat. Ich möchte dem Abgeordneten dazu Folgendes sagen. Ich habe nicht nachgezählt, wie oft ich in dieser Funktion Dringlichkeitsanträge, dringende Fragen zugelassen habe von allen Seiten und auch Dringlichkeitsdebatten darüber, über eine damals euroskeptische Haltung, wie man sie damals nannte, und jetzt die Ansichten der Brexiteers, der Ausstiegswilligen. Und der Abgeordnete war einer von denen damals. Und als ich damals dem Abgeordneten und einigen seiner lieben Kolleginnen und Kollegen die Möglichkeit bot, diese verschiedenen Positionen anzufechten, die vorgetragen worden waren, und auch das vorzutragen, was meinetwegen die Regierung damals alles falsch gemacht haben soll. Da habe ich nicht gehört, dass der Abgeordnete, der sich jetzt beklagt, sich damals beklagt hatte, dass er ausgiebig das Wort erhalten hat mit seinen Kollegen. Ich finde es sehr unfair, wenn solche Behauptungen aufgestellt werden. Es mag ja sein, dass mal das eine oder das andere berücksichtigt worden ist. Ich habe nicht vielleicht alles gehört. Ich möchte aber den Abgeordneten daran erinnern, als vierter Punkt, und ich will das auch noch sagen, weil es wichtig ist, der Abgeordnete aus Basildon und Bill Recchi, der sich da gemeldet hat, hat ja einen Änderungsantrag zur Thronrede der Königin von 2013 eingebracht über die Frage einer Volksabstimmung über die EU-Mitgliedschaft. Eine sehr ungewöhnliche Position damals für einen Hinterbänkler der Regierung. Und ich habe diesen Änderungsantrag zugelassen, weil ich dachte, das sei damals gut begründet gewesen und es gebe Argumente dafür, dieser Frage nachzugehen. Ich möchte also dem Herrn Abgeordneten jetzt Folgendes sagen. Als er Entscheidungen zu seinen Gunsten bekam, hat er nicht gemeckert. Jetzt murrt er und schimpft, weil er das Urteil meiner Entscheidung nicht mag. Das ist aber in aller Ehrenhaftigkeit und Fairness geschehen. Und wenn das dem Abgeordneten nicht gefällt, kann ich nicht viel daran ändern. Ich versuche hier nur das Richtige für das ganze Parlament zu tun. Nichts weiter. Noch eine letzte Bemerkung. Und es ist sehr wichtig, nicht nur für die Abgeordneten hier im Hause, sondern für alle, die uns zuschauen und zuhören. Nichts von dem, was ich hier ausgeführt habe, wirkt sich irgendwie negativ auf die Möglichkeiten der Regierung aus, ihr Abkommen durchzubekommen und die entsprechenden Rechtsvorschriften bis Ende des Monats beschließen zu lassen. Wenn die Regierung die Zahlen hinbekommt, dann kann die Regierung sich durchsetzen und nicht der Speaker hier kann sich dagegen wenden. Ich habe mich dazu geäußert, wie wichtig es ist, dass wir eine lange bewährte Tradition einhalten, die in diesem Unterhaus gelten muss. Das habe ich gemacht und ich möchte mich nicht dafür entschuldigen. Zur Geschäftsordnung. Ja, danke, Mr. Speaker. Ich möchte zum Ban Act etwas sagen, auch zum Verfahren während der nächsten Woche vielleicht. Ich kann das auch noch schriftlich nachreichen, wenn es weiterhilft. Tut mir leid, wenn ich das noch nicht geschafft habe. Das Ban Act, dieses Gesetz, ist ja geändert worden durch den Kollegen aus Aberravon. Und wenn Sie sich an die Diskussion erinnern, hatte ein anderer Abgeordneter sich da erkundigt und gefragt, weshalb dieser Gesetzentwurf nicht durchkomme. Und es hat dann jemand gesagt, einen Sinn brauchen wir dafür gar nicht, wir wollen das einfach so durchbekommen. Und dann kam der Änderungsantrag hier im Unterhaus, auch der Antrag des Kollegen aus Aberravon, der gesagt hatte, es kann hier keine Verlängerung über den 31.10. geben, es sei denn, hier soll ein Abkommen sichergestellt werden. Ich möchte dadurch den Speaker und vielleicht auch schriftlich morgen um eine Klarstellung bitten. Wenn in den nächsten Tagen oder Wochen Änderungsanträge kommen, dann sollten das nur solche sein, die etwas zur Sache dieses Abkommens besagen und wirklich nur das betreffen. Nur das sollte berücksichtigt werden. Nur sinnvolle Änderungsanträge dürfen kommen. Ja, ich kann darauf folgendermaßen antworten. Nicht der Vorsitzende kann hier das Gesetz interpretieren. Das müssen andere machen. Das ist nicht meine Aufgabe. Wenn die Kollegin sich gegenüber mir dazu äußern möchte, dann werde ich jederzeit ihren Brief mir ansehen und das mir zu Gemüte führen und dann eine sachliche Antwort geben. Ich kann das gerne machen. Ich gehe darauf ein und stelle mich dieser Frage. Bitte schön, zur Geschäftsordnung. Mr. Speaker, wäre es nicht besser, diese Frage zurückzustellen, bis wir etwas vom Leader im House of Commons gehört haben, im Unterhaus hier? Das ist natürlich möglich. Dann muss man sehen, ob da jemand sich in diesem Sinne zu Wort meldet. Die Kollegen werden sich entweder dann davon leiten lassen oder auch nicht, je nach Entscheidung. Ein anderer Antrag? Darf ich vielleicht eine Anregung unterbreiten? Könnten Sie vielleicht eine Fotokopie von Erskine May an die Regierungsmitglieder schicken, damit sie wissen, worüber wir hier überhaupt reden? über diese Präzedenzfälle. Die Regierung behauptet immer wieder, die Abgeordneten hier müssten die Möglichkeit haben, sich umzubesinnen. Könnte man die gleiche Höflichkeit auch nicht bei der Regierung gegenüber dem englischen Volk bekunden? Ja, ich habe das gehört. Dann noch eine andere politische Bemerkung, auf die ich aber nicht antworten kann. Was Erskine May angeht, davon war die Rede, so liegt diese Unterlage online vor und ist für alle verfügbar. Was die gleiche Frage angeht zum Thema Abkommen, möchte ich nur darauf hinweisen, dass als ich mich dazu geäußert hatte, am 18. März, eine der ersten Antworten damals von einem Abgeordneten kam, der sagte, darf ich darauf hinweisen, wie sehr ich mich freue, dass Sie beschlossen haben, hier einen Präzedenzfall zu nehmen, den ich unterstützen möchte. Und er hat dann weitere Hinweise und Unterstützungsargumente vorgetragen. Wer damals antwortete, war ganz einfach, der Abgeordnete aus Northeast Somerset, der Leader of the House war das, der also damals ganz auf meiner Seite war in eben dieser Frage. Und ich übernehme diese Position 7 Monate später und jetzt muss er erläutern, ob er weiterhin zu seinen damaligen Ansichten steht. Ja, das mag ja nicht die Mode sein, Mr. Speaker, aber ich glaube, ich sage trotzdem, Sie haben wohl recht. Es ist ganz falsch von den Wählern zu erwarten, diese Frage genauso zu beantworten, wie dies hier versucht wird. Ich möchte dem Abgeordneten Folgendes sagen. Ich kenne ihn seit 22 Jahren und mag ihn sehr. Ich mag ihn wirklich sehr. Ich möchte eine aufkeimende politische Karriere jetzt nicht durch meine Bemerkungen zerstören. Aber einer der großen Vorzüge des genannten Abgeordneten, der sich gemeldet hat, ist der, dass er wirklich ein Modellfall für Beständigkeit, Prinzipien, Treue und faire Grundeinstellung ist. Ein weiterer Antrag zur Geschäftsordnung? Ja, danke, Mr. Speaker. Dieses bedeutungsvolle Votum, von dem die Rede war, da hat das Parlament ja darauf bestanden, dass die Regierung zuhören muss. Aber die Regierung will anscheinend etwas anderes in diesem Prozess. Am Samstag haben wir einiges dazu gehört. Jetzt können wir da aber abstimmen, meine ich. Das ist doch alles klar. Wir haben ja keine leeren Bänke. Wir können doch wirklich unsere Position zum Abkommen des Premierministers vortragen. Ich sehe es wie der Kollege. Wahrscheinlich haben Sie sogar richtig entschieden, abgesehen von dem Umstand, dass wir ja auch an die EU denken, die verfassungsrechtlichen Vorgaben dort. Das bedeutet, dass wir Ende des Monats raus wollen oder müssen. Und wenn wir leere Bänke hier im Hause vorfinden, wenn wir nach Hause gehen und wir dann meinetwegen auch spät hier noch arbeiten, dann versuchen wir doch, hier unsere Verfassung irgendwie hinzubekommen. Und ich weiß nicht, ob das Volk das versteht. Es tut mir leid, wenn ich das nicht ganz verstanden habe, was Sie gerade gesagt haben. Ich habe hier spontan reagieren müssen. Ob nun heute debattiert wird oder nicht, die Regierung muss die entsprechenden Rechtsvorschriften erst einmal durchbekommen haben. Insofern also, wie der Abgeordnete sich Sorgen macht über den Zeitaufwand für die Gesetzgebung, für die Programmplanung dafür, die Sitzungsstunden, die dafür nötig sind, die Lästigkeit, die das alles mit sich bringen kann, diese Erwägungen gelten natürlich in jedem Fall, ob nun heute debattiert wird hier oder nicht. Die eigentliche Frage ist folgende. Wollen wir jetzt pragmatisch entscheiden und meinetwegen zulassen, dass eine seit langem geübte Praxis gebrochen wird, oder gehen wir nach den Grundsätzen? Und ich habe mich nach den Grundsätzen gerichtet und die Regierung hatten jede Möglichkeit mit Unterstützung des Unterhauses nicht nur vorzutragen, was sie möchte, sondern auch bis Ende Oktober alles durchzubekommen, was sie hat. Und das hängt von der Ansicht des Parlaments ab. Ich komme zu den anderen Anträgen noch. Bitte schön. Danke, Mr. Speaker. Bevor Sie das vorgetragen haben, und wir kennen uns ja auch schon seit 30 Jahren und haben ein gemeinsames politisches Leben, wenn auch in unterschiedlichen Richtungen geführt. Gut, ich habe zur Kenntnis genommen, was die Kollegen letzte Woche auch dazu gesagt haben. Ich jedenfalls habe auch schon vorgetragen, dass Sie als Vorsitzender Parteilichkeit gezeigt haben. Das habe ich früher auch schon gesagt. Genau wie der Kollege aus New Forest West muss ich das unterstreichen. Ich habe festgestellt, in welcher enger Form Sie sich heute geäußert haben. Das mag ja vernünftig erscheinen, wenn ich auf Ihrer Grundlage verfahre, auf dem, was Sie vorgetragen haben. Aber die Umstände haben sich doch geändert. Man muss doch wissen, wie die Antwort auf das Schreiben aussieht, das aus dem Parlament herausgegangen ist. Wir müssen doch wissen, was darauf geantwortet wird, und dann kann entschieden werden. Ja, Wiederholungen sind natürlich keine neue Erscheinung, auch bei mir nicht. Ich habe das häufig gesagt und ich muss es noch einmal sagen. Ich halte mich an Lord Whitelaw, an das, was er gesagt hat. Er sagte, ich persönlich glaube, es ist am besten, dass ich Brücken erst überquere, wenn ich angekommen bin. Ich muss also, ganz persönlich gesagt, darüber nachdenken und dann entsprechend den Umständen entscheiden. Ich will hier keinen Streit mit irgendjemandem, auch nicht mit dem Abgeordneten, und weiß zu schätzen, wie freundlich er sich anfänglich geäußert hat. Und ich vertrete natürlich auch sein Recht, eine Meinung zu haben, aber ich habe auch meine Rolle als Speaker und ich habe zu versuchen, im Parlament die Dinge voranzubringen. Manchmal mag man das, andere mögen das nicht, egal was herauskommt, aber das ist mein ehrlicher Ansatz als Speaker. Wenn er das nicht gut findet, tut es mir leid, ich kenne ihn ja schon lange, aber ich kann und muss damit leben und sehe darin keine Unhöflichkeit. Beiden Seiten nicht. Das ist eine Meinung. Es wird noch andere Meinungen geben. Ich habe so entschieden und wir werden dann sehen müssen, wie die Ereignisse sich weiterentwickeln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a genuine point of order. And my understanding of Erskine May is,
also ich verstehe Erskine May folgendermaßen. Die Frage der Wiederholung bezieht sich auf eine Sitzung des Parlaments. Wir hatten ja eine Verlängerung seit 29. März und das könnte bedeuten, dass die Regierung die gleiche Frage noch mal auf den Tisch bringen könnten. Also die Frage, die schon am 29. März diskutiert wurde. Und zweitens wäre es möglich, eine Variation des Antrags vorzubringen. Und da ging es um die Unterartikel 1 und 3. Vielen Dank. Das ist wirklich ein Geschäftsordnungsantrag. Ich antworte wie folgt. Ich möchte nicht unhöflich sein. Das bezog sich auf den 18. März, nicht auf den 29. März. Da habe ich mich nicht auf einen Antrag bezogen oder auf einen Änderungsantrag. Das war in der letzten Sitzung, sondern ich habe mich bezogen auf das Urteil, das ich in Bezug auf das Abkommen dort erlassen habe. Da geht es nicht von einer Sitzung zur anderen, denn dieses Abkommen hat ja die letzten 415 Jahre überlebt. Ich glaube, das ist also eine gute Grundlage. Zweitens habe ich sehr spezifisch gesagt, dass das Thema behandelt wurde, und zwar jüngst am Samstag, mit einer sehr klaren Entscheidung, die dem Änderungsantrag gefolgt ist, und dass wir diese Frage heute nicht noch mal betrachten müssen. Und in Bezug auf Ihre Frage, ob...
Wir haben das alles zusammen verfolgt, Herr Gutschka. Keine richtige Überraschung. Viele Beobachter da hatten ja schon gesagt, dass er so entscheiden wird, also keine Abstimmung über den Antrag. Wie hat er das begründet, der Parlamentssprecher?
Ja, er hat eben gesagt, es ist abgestimmt worden am Samstag über den Deal, den die Regierung mit der EU ausgehandelt hat. Und jetzt gäbe es nur eine Möglichkeit für ihn, eine weitere Abstimmung so kurz darauf anzusetzen, wenn sich die Umstände entscheidend geändert haben. Argument der Regierung, die Umstände haben sich geändert, weil Boris Johnson ja in der Zwischenzeit den Brief nach Brüssel geschickt hat und um Verlängerung gebeten hat. Argument, Gegenargument von Bercow, das in diesem Fall sticht, denn er ist derjenige, der die Sache alleine entscheidet. Nein, Das der Premierminister hat nur getan, was das Recht vorschreibt. Und dass der Premierminister sich an das Recht hält, ist keine Änderung der Umstände.
Das war jetzt eine lange Debatte zur Geschäftsordnung, aber es hat doch am Ende jetzt auch noch mal offenbart, welche Machtfülle John Bercow hat. In diesem ganzen Prozess hat er ja immer wieder entscheidende Weichen nur er alleine gestellt. Ist das so? Hat er dieses Amt damit irgendwie neu interpretiert oder ist man von so einem starken Sprecher hat man das schon immer so gehabt?
Er ist Sprecher in einer absoluten Ausnahmesituation des britischen Parlamentarismus. Die Regierung hat keine Mehrheit. Sie hat sogar ihre Mehrheit über die vergangenen Wochen hinweg ihre Stimmen immer weiter verloren. Teilweise durch Abgeordnete, die von sich ausgegangen sind und dann zuletzt, weil sie von Boris Johnson ausgeschlossen worden sind. Und das ist eine absolute Ausnahmesituation. Dieses britische Parlament und das britische Wahlsystem beruht ja auf klaren Machtverhältnissen. Winner takes it all. Nicht? Es ist möglich, mit weniger als der Hälfte der Stimmen 2/3 der Sitze zu haben. Klare Unterscheidung. Die Regierung sitzt auf der einen Seite, die Opposition auf der anderen Seite. Und jetzt plötzlich geraten die Verhältnisse ins Tanzen. Die Regierung hat keine Mehrheit mehr. Die Opposition kann neue Koalitionen bilden. Und der Speaker ist in dieser Situation zu demjenigen geworden, der garantiert, dass die Regierung ihre Geschäftsordnungshoheit, die sie trotz allem hat, nicht mehr 100% durchsetzen kann, weil es eine neue Mehrheit im Parlament gibt. Und dieser Mehrheit hat er Raum gegeben durch sehr viele Entscheidungen. Und deswegen ist er ein Stück weit Partei geworden in diesem Konflikt.
Würden Sie das als eine glückliche oder eine unglückliche Rolle beschließen, so als neutraler Beobachter, befinden Sie als neutraler Beobachter?
Also ich würde sagen, er ist nicht die Ursache des Problems. Die Ursache des Problems ist wirklich, die Regierung hat keine Mehrheit mehr und dann kann dieser britische Parlamentarismus nicht mehr richtig funktionieren. Ein Beispiel, an dem man das ganz dramatisch sieht. Der Premierminister hat in Großbritannien das Recht, das Parlament aufzulösen. Und das kann er jetzt aber nicht mehr, weil es eine Mehrheit dagegen gibt. Und das ist sozusagen dysfunktional. Das ermöglicht uns diese lebendigen Debatten und diese Abstimmungen, wo man nie weiß, was rauskommt. Aber die Idee des Parlamentarismus ist natürlich eine andere. Die Opposition soll sich bereithalten für den Tag, an dem sie die Regierung übernimmt. Und jetzt ist die Opposition diejenige, die die Regierung von hinten herum steuert und Entscheidungen der Regierung durchkreuzen kann. Der Speaker nimmt sehr wirkungsvoll seine Position ein. Er bekommt dadurch natürlich
expert in these matters, and I have not been counselled that what I have said today is wrong. I have not been counselled that what I have said today is wrong, and I have a very strong sense that there is a pretty wide acceptance that on this matter, my judgment, however inconvenient and irksome to some people, has the advantage of being procedurally right. Point of order, Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respect your judgment, and I share your love of precedent, but given what you have said, and given that there have already been a number of votes in this House for a second referendum and voted against, will you apply the same precedents about having repetitive votes when you consider in your deliberations if amendments are put forward for a second referendum?
To the honourable gentleman for what he said, and the principle that I have enunciated has wider application. We are in a new session. We are in a new session. The same question convention applies to consideration of the same matter in the same session. I very gently say to the right honourable gentleman that we are in a new session, a point that is in fact so blindingly obvious that I'm sure it won't have escaped the right honourable gentleman, who's a very clever fellow, for a moment. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Some of my constituents have written to me today concerned that the reason that the vote has not been allowed is because the result would go in the government's favour. Now, I'm sure that I've heard that you've given reason for it. But on Saturday, the amendment was brought forward by a right honourable member, member for West Dorset. He has said himself that were the bill to be brought forward, the vote to be brought forward now, that he would not amend it again, and that he would support the government's legislation to come forward. So is there not a sign that actually something has changed since Saturday?
answer to that. I don't recall every single word that the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for West Dorset has said, though I am familiar with the thrust of his argumentation on these matters. It is a matter of record that the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for West Dorset has voted for the withdrawal agreement 3 times, and it is a matter of record that he has expressed support for the government's latest deal with the European Union, causing him, therefore, to be inclined to vote for the legislation. The Right Honourable Gentleman can vote for the legislation if he wishes, and I have every expectation on the strength of what he said that he will do so. But the Right Honourable Gentleman doesn't determine what the judgment is about the same question convention. I mean, he could if he were the Speaker of the House, and if the Honourable Lady is going to make a belated attempt to persuade the Right Honourable Gentleman to abandon his retirement plans and to seek election to the chair, she may have success with him or she may not. I don't know. He doesn't seem to be offering me any encouragement in that matter. But I've made the judgment I've made, and I think it's the right judgment to make. Point of order, Mr. Geraint Davis.
Point of order. Her Majesty the Queen thought she had 5 weeks to write her Queen's speech, but then she was just given a few days, and she's waiting intently to know what the response of the House is on the Queen's speech. But instead, the Leader of the House has put down a motion which is basically a copycat of the motion on Saturday in breach of Erskine May, and predictably, I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, you ruled it out of order. Isn't this a discourtesy to Her Majesty and reason that the Leader should reconsider his position for his own incompetence?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, but I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. I certainly am not accusing the Leader of discourtesy. I'm not doing so at all. In fact, I celebrated his unfailing courtesy to me, and I think he would acknowledge mine to him. We are going to hear from the Leader of the House with the business statement, and if the Honourable Gentleman wants to question the Leader of the House on that business statement and to express his indignation, I very much doubt any force on earth will stop him doing so. If that exhausts the appetite for now of colleagues to raise points of order, and I'm very grateful to colleagues for what they've said and for the courtesy with which they've expressed themselves, whether they agree with my ruling or not. We come now to the first of our urgent questions. Urgent question, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask an urgent question, namely to ask the Prime Minister to make a statement on the publication of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill and his letter of the 19th of October to the European Council seeking an extension to the period provided under Article 50.
The Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, Secretary Stephen Barclay.
Mr. Speaker, notice of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill was given to the House on Saturday. The bill was handed to the House yesterday as agreed with the House authorities. It will be introduced for first reading at the start of main business today. The publication of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is therefore now being delayed by the Leader of the Opposition because he has tabled an urgent question requesting the publication of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Genius. The Withdrawal Agreement Bill could not, Mr. Speaker, be finalised until the European Council on Thursday the 17th of October, and then follows a historic meeting of this House on Saturday the 19th of October. It has then been introduced on the following sitting day, and as you said just a moment ago, Mr. Speaker, in response to a point of order, what could be shorter than the next sitting day? The sooner this urgent question and the next urgent question are concluded, the sooner it will be available to members. In respect to the Prime Minister's letter to President Tusk of the 19th of October, this was sent in compliance with Section 1 of the Benn Act. The President of the European Council has accepted the request as valid and indicated he is considering it and consulting with Member States.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do admire the Secretary of State for keeping a straight face while he gave that answer. And I'm very grateful to this urgent question being granted, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has not deigned to grace us with his presence today, but I'm reassured, Mr. Speaker, that despite his pledge, he's not to be found anywhere in a ditch. I would, however, like to welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has sent a letter over the weekend to the EU President Donald Tusk to comply with the EU Withdrawal No. 2 Act. Mr. Speaker, as we've come to expect with this Prime Minister, this has been done with posturing and attempts to distract. But despite having told the British public over and over again he would never do it, the letter has, in fact, been sent. Yeah. The request is not only legally necessary and prevents us crashing out of the EU with no deal, but the extension allows this House the space to scrutinise the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. I want to pay tribute to all those members who've worked hard to ensure a no-deal Brexit is ruled out, and I will continue to work across the House to ensure that this continues to be the case. Mr. Speaker, the European Commission has confirmed today that Brussels is now considering the terms of an extension. Can the Secretary of State tell the House when he expects any extension to be granted? And can he categorically rule out the absolutely ridiculous reports yesterday that Conservative MPs are trying to amend the law to jail members of Parliament alleged to have colluded with foreign powers? Does he, like me, fear that for the honourable member for Shrewsbury and Atcham, who is telling everyone who will listen that he is trying to collude with the Polish and Hungarian governments to veto any possibility of Article 50 extensions? Mr. Speaker, this type of nonsense is doing nobody any good at all. If the Prime Minister wants to get his deal through, he should bring forward the withdrawal agreement bill for scrutiny. Will he also bring forward an economic impact assessment?
Yes, that would be good.
Which has so far not seen the light of day. And will he allow this House ample time to scrutinise what this deal means to the communities that we all represent?
Well, I can tell the House what has been ditched, and it is the Honourable Gentleman's manifesto, which he has ditched from the commitment he gave to respect the referendum result to one which is now characterised by dither and delay. He says that he questions the letter from the Prime Minister. What the Prime Minister made clear is that we would abide by the law. And what Lord Pannick has confirmed, amongst many others, is that the Prime Minister has done so. So there is no question as to the commitment from the Prime Minister. But of course he disagrees with the action, and it won't surprise any members either of this House or of the European Council as to what the position of the Prime Minister is and his commitment to leaving on the 31st of October. The Honourable Gentleman talks about collusion. We in this House, Mr. Speaker, want to collude with the British public to respect the referendum result and to get Brexit done. And when he talks about delay, he should answer this question. If he wants a second referendum, we know the Shadow Brexit Secretary wants a second referendum, but if he wants a second referendum, how long is that going to take? How long will the primary legislation take? How long will the Electoral Commission requirements take? How long is he going to leave the House in purgatory? He gave a commitment that if we went past the 31st of October, there would be a general election. And yet on the Moore programme on Sunday, the Shadow Brexit Secretary said he wanted further delay in order to have a second referendum. So when is he going to accept the Prime Minister's challenge? When is he going to have a general election? Or are we going to have, as the Shadow Brexit Secretary said, more dither, more delay and more shirking of his responsibilities?
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, could my right honourable friend try to ensure the government stops giving this sort of sacred equality to the date of October the 31st, which is a really rather silly point, which has intruded into the extremely complicated arguments we're having on this whole issue, although I personally would be quite happy if we could conclude a withdrawal agreement along the lines the Prime Minister is proposing by 31st of October, if we could do it properly. But the date was not selected by the British public or the British government. It was a compromise in the EU between President Macron and the rest, and was plucked out of the air. So will he agree with me that what matters is we get the right withdrawal agreement, carried with the tenuous majority the government may have, through second reading and third reading, so its form is actually settled, and then we can proceed in a way which future generations, if we get it right, or if we get it wrong, will regard as much more important than whether we actually made it for a particular day in October 2019.
But the reality, Mr. Speaker, is the date was set by the previous European Council, and it is not a unilateral decision for the UK Parliament as to whether that date is changed. Now, previously in this House, the Father of the House has said what mattered was avoiding no deal. The Prime Minister has secured a deal that does that. So what matters now is that we end the uncertainty for businesses, the uncertainty for citizens, and actually deliver on the deal the Prime Minister has negotiated, one agreed by the EU 27 as well, and we get Brexit done.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I congratulate the Leader of the Opposition for lodging this question. But of course, it's a question to the Prime Minister. And it's a question about the Prime Minister's behaviour. Where is he? Where is the respect that the Prime Minister is showing to this House? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is utterly humiliated by his defeat on Saturday. A defeat that saw this House reject his unfair anti-democratic deal. A defeat, Mr. Speaker, that has forced the Prime Minister to send a letter to the European Union Council requesting a deal. But what did the Prime Minister do? He sent a letter, not on headed paper, and unsigned.
Pathetic.
Can I ask if the Prime Minister is used to sending unsigned letters in his capacity as Prime Minister, and if so, how many? And I want a direct answer to that question.
Anonymous letters.
But I think we know the answer. Because his behaviour lacks dignity. It lacks respect. It is not becoming of any Prime Minister. Once again, the Prime Minister has shown himself to be unworthy of the office he holds. Mr. Speaker, I have with me a copy of a joint letter sent from the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales to President Tusk, properly addressed, with their official letterheads, and duly signed. The Prime Minister should take note. That is a lesson on how to behave. Because his actions don't just show disrespect to this House, but to the court in Scotland, but to President Tusk himself. Despite the Prime Minister's childish games of sending a contrary letter, of course, the SNP is pleased to see that the grown-ups in room, namely the European Council, are now considering the extension. An extension that must be secured to protect our interests from the economic oblivion if we were to exit the European Union on a no-deal Brexit. Mr. Speaker, I join with the Leader of the Opposition to express the SNP's outrage that the Prime Minister has instructed his government to publish the withdrawal bill without securing adequate time for parliamentary debate and scrutiny. Once again, this Conservative government is showing disregard for democracy. It is absolutely imperative that representatives here are able to do our jobs and scrutinise the legislation, given the magnitude of the implications. So I say to the Prime Minister, through the Secretary that's here, if he's not afraid of democratic debate, secure the extension and let's give the time for full scrutiny of the bill. And let me ask this. If he's so sure that the people are with him, will he confirm today that he will seek support for this bill from the Scottish Parliament, who must give consent first.
Well, the crux of the issue is the Prime Minister has complied with the law. But it is right that alongside that he sets out his well-known views, and that should not come as a surprise to the right honourable gentleman any more than it should to any other member of this House. But what is unworthy, Mr. Speaker, is to have referendums and to ignore the result, which is a position of the right honourable gentleman not just in terms of the referendum in 2014, but also in terms of the referendum in 2016. After more than 1,200 days since the referendum, the one thing I don't think this House has lacked is opportunity to debate the issues contained in the withdrawal agreement bill. And the withdrawal bill will be published, it is with the House, in order for that debate to happen. So it's time for the House to get on to that debate, to back the bill, to get Brexit done, and to get on to the domestic priorities, the record investment in our health service, the extra 20,000 police officers that we're recruiting, and levelling up all parts of the United Kingdom as part of a strong economic delivery.
Sir John Redwood.
I'm glad the government wishes to base our future relationship with the EU on comprehensive free trade agreement. So will the government get on and table one and show urgency in trying to get one? Because the sooner we can get one, the more reassuring it will be in Northern Ireland. And the public, who are heartily sick of all this, don't want to waste another 15 months. And Mr. Speaker, may I personally thank you for avoiding Groundhog Day today. I heard all the arguments on Saturday. I don't think I need to hear them again.
Well, I agree with my right honourable friend. We need to get on to the future relationship. The House has been debating endlessly the winding down provisions, which is what is contained in the withdrawal agreement bill. And what the political declaration sets out is a clear framework for a best-in-class free trade agreement, and we need to pass the bill in order to get on to doing that.
Jay Swinson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was withering in his criticism of the first Brexit deal, and yet he voted for it. He said that no Conservative PM should ever accept a border down the Irish Sea, and yet he has. And he said he would never ask for an extension of Article 50, and yet he sent the letter doing just that. If the Prime Minister is allowed to change his mind, surely the government should give the public the opportunity to do the same by putting their Brexit deal to a people's vote.
I think it's somewhat ironic to have a question about changing minds from the Liberal Democrats, who were the first party to call for an in-out referendum, and who now want a people's vote on the basis of ignoring the people's vote that we've had.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The urgent question was introduced by the Leader of the Opposition, which is somewhat unusual. May I refer my right honourable friend to a bill which was introduced in 1997 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition with the Right Honourable Tony Benn, which says that the sections 2 and 3 of the European Communities Act 1972 are hereby repealed, that the European Court of Justice shall have no effect in the United Kingdom, and would he also recall the number of times, which, as far as I'm concerned, was indefinite, when the Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition went through the lobby with me on every single occasion relating to European matters? Does he accept that this really does demonstrate a monumental, not only mere U-turn, but a monumental degree of lack of memory and a lack of understanding of what the withdrawal bill is all about and the referendum itself?
Well, my right honourable friend has always stuck to his principles. The reality is the Leader of the Opposition cannot even stick to his own manifesto.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't the Brexit Secretary agree with me that the Prime Minister has a problem with veracity? He told us that he would rather be dead in a ditch than sign the letter and sign the letter. He told us that there would be no border in the Irish Sea. and then he negotiated a border in the Irish Sea. Why on earth should we ever believe a single thing that this Prime Minister says?
Well, the Prime Minister didn't sign the letter, so I think the issue with veracity was actually in the question.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Would my right friend agree that what the recipients of the letter and other EU member states, and indeed the country, want to know is whether or not the agreement that they have reached with the Prime Minister commands the majority support of this House? And how does he propose to explain to them that now, on a second day of the House of Commons meeting, we are still unable to discover that?
I very much share my right honourable friend's frustration. That exactly is the question that will be posed in Capitals. They have reached a deal with the government. They want to see the UK leave in a smooth and orderly way. That is what their citizens want to see, is what UK citizens in Europe want to happen, and the sooner we get on and do it, the better.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's reported that the Secretary of State this morning told the House of Lords Select Committee that under this agreement, goods leaving Northern Ireland for the rest of the United Kingdom will require an exit summary declaration to be submitted. Can he confirm for the House that such declarations have to be made when goods leave the customs territory of the European Union? If so, how does that square with Article 4 of the Protocol, which says that Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom? It's either part of the European Union or the United Kingdom. It can't be both.
Well, what I was referring to in those remarks was in line with international obligations. Some practical information will be needed to be provided electronically on the movement of goods from west to east. However, the government will be considering the process during the implementation period.
Craig McKinley. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say on the floor of this House now, I have zero and absolutely no respect for the Ben Surrender Act. I have no respect by the means by which it was brought to the House and the order paper was taken over. I have no respect that it had 4 hours debate with 1 day's notice. I have no respect. Now, Mr. Speaker, you were not in the chair that afternoon, but the manner in which manuscript amendments were being debated before they're available, this was a shambolic act brought by those who do not want to respect Brexit. The government should be in control of the order paper, and if others don't want that, they can lay a vote of no confidence that they will not do. I really wonder, Mr. Speaker, what is this urgent question for? Is it an argument that somehow the government should have delivered a letter that was gold-trimmed on a sort of a sequined velvet cushion to the Commission? Can the Secretary of State confirm that the letter has obviously been treated as genuine and is being dealt with in the appropriate way by the Council of Ministers, much as I would have preferred that the government and the Prime Minister had ignored this shambolic Ben Act?
Well, the Ben legislation, as he well knows, was designed to prevent a no-deal exit. The Prime Minister was told that changing the backstop was impossible. He delivered it. He was told the withdrawal agreement text couldn't be changed. He did so. We now have a deal that the House can pass. I hope members across the House will do so with the withdrawal agreement bill in order that we can leave on the 31st of October, as citizens and businesses around the country want us to do, and to get on with it.
Mr. Barry Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Minister realises that I could never get angry with him. He's always been, he and I have always had very good relationships, and I trust him a very long way. But can I ask you, can I beg him to talk to the Prime Minister about this whole sort of, it's almost a philosophy of get on with it. You know, we must get this done, get on with it. Would he agree with me? It's our sacred duty, not just to get on with it, to make sure what the deal is, the quality of it, actually serves our constituents, because they depend on us for their health, their welfare, their future, their prosperity. So we must take this business seriously and slowly. Get on with it is a nasty jibe. Stop it.
Well, firstly, can I thank the honourable gentleman for the kind words with which he prefaced his question, and I very much have always enjoyed working with him on that basis. In terms of the detail, he's right. We do need to get that detail right. But we also need to be clear as to what the scope of the withdrawal agreement bill is. It is to implement the deal, the international treaty that has been reached. It is not to determine the future relationship, which the House, through the withdrawal agreement bill, will have a lot of opportunity in terms of the negotiation mandate to discuss and get right. So we need to implement the treaty. We need to do that through what has been agreed with the EU in the form of the withdrawal agreement bill, and then get on to the debates which I look forward to having with him on the terms of the free trade agreement as we move forward with that deal.
Ben Bradley. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if my honourable friend shares my concern that two members of opposition frontbench parties now have said it's not good enough simply to police the Prime Minister's actions through the courts. They now also want to police his thoughts and opinions as well. I think that's quite a sinister preview of what life might be like under a Labour government if it were to happen. Can he confirm my understanding of the process for the following week and the legislation, and perhaps for my constituents' clarity, that if members opposite bring forward amendments that are not compatible with the agreement that we've made with the European Union, all that will achieve is not to have the outcome of those amendments, it will just frustrate and prevent us from passing a deal and leaving on time.
Well, on the detail in terms of the next steps, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, will make a business statement after the urgent questions, and I would not want to preempt that. But on the wider point, he's absolutely right. The Prime Minister has met his legal obligation. That has been recognised by the President of the European Court, the European Union. And what we now need to do is implement the withdrawal agreement bill, get Brexit done, and get on to the free trade agreement, which the honourable gentleman referred to earlier.
Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the fact that despite all the malarkey and green ink letters and spin on Saturday night, the European Union have accepted the request for an extension. But does it concern the Secretary of State that in the court action raised in Scotland, in which I acknowledge the support of Dale Vince, despite the fact that the Prime Minister, the Attorney General and the Advocate General have all assured the court that the Prime Minister will obey the Benn Act and ask the court to dismiss the action, despite those promises and assurances, the court have seen fit to continue the action to make sure that the Prime Minister keeps his promise?
Well, it's not for a Minister of the Crown to comment on any live court proceedings, but to follow the lexicon of the Honourable Lady, what would be malarkey is for claimants to send letters before the publication of the correspondence that address the issue that was sought in the earlier judgment.
Neil O'Brien.
Recently returned to the House after 2 weeks paternity leave following the birth of my following the birth of my son, my beautiful son Arthur. I've returned to find even better the Prime Minister secured a wonderful Brexit deal, which I look forward to voting.
Name? You want to know the name of the child?
Arthur, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend reassure me that he will now crack on and get the legislation through so that we can get Brexit done and not be still talking about this when Arthur is old enough to drive?
Let me be the first to congratulate the honourable gentleman on the birth of Arthur, and we wish him a long and happy and healthy life. And I had noticed the absence of the honourable gentleman, and it's very good to welcome him back to the chamber. Secretary of State.
Well, there may have been delays in getting Brexit delivered, but I'm delighted that Arthur has been delivered, and I'm sure I speak for the whole House in both offering our congratulations and also wishing Arthur every success for the future. He's absolutely right. I think up and down the country there is huge frustration both amongst our constituents but also with businesses that want an end to the uncertainty, want to see a deal reached, recognise it's in the country's interest to leave in a smooth and orderly way, and see that the Prime Minister has agreed a deal that is brought to the House. It's now for the House to pass the legislation to enable us to move forward and to get on to the other priorities we want to do.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have received thousands of emails since the Prime Minister brought back his deal on Thursday from constituents who are asking me to tell them what the impact of this deal will be on their jobs, livelihoods and future prosperity for the communities in which they live. I'm unable to do so because the government are refusing to publish an economic impact assessment. What is the answer to them? Will GDP go down? Will jobs and unemployment go up? What is the answer?
Well, the answer is to listen to the Bank of England governor, who says that getting this deal passed will be a boost to our economy, because there's a huge amount of investment ready to be released into the economy if we get this deal passed. The voices of business up and down the country want a decision, want the UK to move forward in a smooth and orderly way, and the best way of addressing the concerns of his constituents is to get Brexit done.
Mr. Speaker, at the Dover front line, we have long been ready for any eventuality, deal or no deal, to leave the European Union. But what we now need is certainty, because uncertainty, and it's dragging on, is becoming economically damaging. So has he had any representations from party opposites about how they'll assist with getting on with Brexit, or has he only ever heard, as I have heard, that they simply want to cancel Brexit and defy the British people?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend that what we need is certainty, and what the Prime Minister's deal offers is exactly that. And what we have from the benches opposite is more dither, more delay, a desire for a second referendum, and yet no clarity as to how long that second referendum would take.
Ms Leslie.
I understand the Minister's political reasons for the reluctance around the Ben Act, but it is the law of the land, and it's important because I'm worried from what he's said that he seems to give the impression it's only about sending a letter. It's more than that. Section 1, subsection 4 of the Ben Act requires that the Prime Minister, quote, must seek to obtain an extension. So it's not just a matter of sending a letter, he must seek to obtain that extension. And that involves using the Prime Minister's best endeavours, his good faith, in trying to... There's a duty on the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, that he must seek to obtain an extension. So will the Minister acknowledge that the legal duties on the Prime Minister are not simply about sending an unsigned letter?
Well said.
I mean, the reality is this is Parliament's letter, and the Prime Minister has sent Parliament's letter. But he's been clear that he will comply with the law. He has complied with the law. That is reflected in the comments of figures such as Lord Panic. But he is also entitled to express his views, and that's exactly what he's done.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say that lots of my constituents in East Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire think that what happened on Saturday was a Westminster bubble, smarty-pants little stitch-up to stop us leaving the European Union on October 31st. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? That's exactly what it was. And can I say to him, the reason why October the 31st is so important is because so many people in this country, particularly across the north of England, have figured out what's going on in here. There is an attempt to play for time, to delay, delay and delay, with the one and simple aim, which is to overturn the referendum result that people in here never accepted and never had any intention of accepting.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The House said that it didn't believe the Prime Minister would get a deal. He did get a deal. They said they wanted a meaningful vote. Then when the opportunity is presented to have a meaningful vote, they make it meaningless. It's time for those games to stop, for us to get a deal through, and the opportunity to do so is to support the withdrawal agreement bill that legislates on the deal the Prime Minister has reached.
Catherine McKinnell.
Speaker, the Chancellor has responded to the Treasury Select Committee's request of 3 months ago asking for updated economic analysis of the free trade agreement that the government is pursuing. The Chancellor has acknowledged that the current economic analysis does not correspond with previous analysis produced by the government, but has not indicated any commitment to provide updated economic analysis. He appears to think it's acceptable for MPs to vote blindly on a potential free trade agreement. Either he has something to hide, or he thinks that's an acceptable way for MPs to be left in the dark.
Well, the reality is the House will have lots of opportunities to debate and instruct in terms of the negotiating mandate how those negotiations are taken forward. I mean, the reality is that any modelling for the future would have to take on board what is the future direction of the Commission under the new leadership. It would have to consider what actions the UK government would take in response. It'd have to model what would happen elsewhere in the world, for example, in terms of China and the US. So the reality is one can't do a forecast on these things, but it's right that the House will have an opportunity to negotiate these and to discuss these as part of shaping the mandate for the future.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Leader of the Opposition was slightly wrong in his question when he said the letter takes no deal off the table. That's impossible, because it's up to the other nations of the European Union whether they grant an extension or not. The only way, sir, you can definitely take no deal off the table is, as someone else once said, is vote for this deal, and that's exactly what this House should do. Does the Secretary of State agree?
I very much agree with my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to him for his support for the deal. And the reality is, as he says, this is Parliament's letter, but any extension would require the agreement of all 27 member states, and that is something that is outside of Parliament's control.
I'm not quite sure from her expression whether the Right Honourable Lady, the member from Maidenhead, is welcoming the Honourable Gentleman's belated support or regretting the fact that it wasn't on offer at a rather earlier stage. Both. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the reasons why I believe that the government wanted to try and bounce us on Saturday and wanted to bounce us again was actually to hide some of the content and some of the revelations that will come out in the bill which we will see published shortly. And I think there will be great concerns, not only on this side of the House, but indeed from others who take a very different position from me on Brexit. But I want to take the Secretary of State back to the question that my right honourable friend, who's now not in his place, the chair of the committee, asked about customs declarations, export declarations between Northern Ireland and the UK. Will he confirm that what he said to Lord Wood in the other place was that export declaration paperwork would be have to carry out, and therefore, essentially, firms in Northern Ireland will be having to carry out paperwork, and whether digital or otherwise, to trade within their own country, within the United Kingdom? And will he also confirm whether that will apply going back in the opposite direction or not?
As I said in response to the earlier question, I'm very happy to confirm that it is the case that in respect of some international obligations, then there will be occasions where information is needed electronically for the movement of goods, and that is in accordance with international obligations. But the reality is, he talks about bouncing decision-making. We've already had 2 extensions. The House has debated these issues endlessly. The withdrawal agreement, the first version of the withdrawal agreement, was published as long ago as last November. The reality is he doesn't want any Brexit. He wants a second referendum. He wants to remain, and he will do everything he can to frustrate Brexit happening.
Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can we write another letter to the European Union saying that we utterly oppose having a second referendum? And does my right honourable friend not agree that a second referendum is a betrayal of many thousands of Harlow voters who voted to leave and millions of working people across the country? We should respect democracy and implement the result of 2016.
Well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. A second referendum would simply take us back to square one. It would create huge uncertainty, huge delay, and prolong the paralysis of this Parliament when we need a general election and to let the people decide.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to return to the issue of the economic impact assessment, because the effect of all this on manufacturing in my constituency in particular is absolutely critical. So I don't know whether the government are unwilling or unable to release any information they've got on this, but surely the Minister can see how important it is that we have all this information before we make any decisions. After all, he wouldn't buy a house without looking at the deeds, would he?
But the point that is missing is the free trade agreement is still to be negotiated, and what is causing damage to businesses in his constituency and elsewhere is reflected in, for example, the comments of people like Lord Rose, who was a leader of the Remain campaign, who now recognises that what is damaging to business is the ongoing uncertainty. We need to bring that uncertainty to an end, and it is his continued refusal to vote both for a deal whilst also opposing no deal, which is prolonging the uncertainty and damaging the interests of businesses in his constituency.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you stayed tuned to the Andrew Marr show after watching Match of the Day yesterday morning, but if you did, you'd have heard the Right Honourable Member for Esher and Malton say that Parliament cannot muzzle the Prime Minister. He doesn't want an extension. He should be at liberty to tell the EU that. Does my Right Honourable friend agree?
I very much agree. I don't think it will come as a surprise to colleagues in Europe as to what the view of the Prime Minister is. He has been clear from day one that he wanted a deal, despite many voices in this House suggesting otherwise. And he's been clear that it's in the country's interest to leave on the 31st of October. That remains his commitment, and that is exactly what the government is committed to doing.
I think the honourable gentleman was referring to a show at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Yes, I do periodically watch that programme. It isn't sort of top of my list of priorities, but occasionally I will observe it. But I'm bound to say it was a rather greater priority yesterday morning at 9 o'clock to be playing tennis. Very wise. Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as the unsigned letter the Prime Minister refused even to grace with his name, he sent another letter which he signed in his own name, effectively saying, "Dear Donald, please ignore the first letter I've sent you. I only sent it to comply with an Act of Parliament." If it was not the purpose of that second letter to deliberately attempt to frustrate an Act of this Parliament, what on earth was the second letter for?
Well, as I have said in response to several questions now, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is entitled to express his view. That should not come as a surprise to the honourable gentleman. He has complied with the law. Leading legal figures such as Lord Pannick accept that he has complied with the law, but in addition he has set out his view as he's entitled to do.
Which side is it now? Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, I hadn't planned standing and just wanted to make a clear point that match of the day every time trumps anything else, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. But I would want to my right honourable friend that can he just explain to me, as it is now finally it appears to be the opposition's position, although I'm never quite clear whether that will change next week, that they want to have a second referendum. Could he then explain to me what could anybody say to the British public when they go out and say, we didn't trust you last time, now you have to trust us that we will trust you again on a second referendum? How could they possibly believe or trust British politicians?
I must tell the Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford and Woodford Green that he shares that penchant with the late and great Anthony Crossland, who greatly enjoyed watching Match of the Day, who would often have colleagues around the dinner table in his home, and they would be discussing political matters. But moments before Match of the Day, Crossland would make it very clear that all further political discussion must cease as he proposed to watch the programme, and he would usually don a bobble hat whilst doing so. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps we could have a similar tradition for the remaining duration of the Rugby World Cup, which I'm sure across the House many members would also enjoy applying that maxim to. My friend is absolutely correct in terms of, well, firstly, the position of the opposition. I appreciate it has moved rather a lot and rather frequently. But if I take the position set out by the Shadow Brexit Secretary on Sunday, it clearly was for a second referendum. And that is odd, given that they don't trust the people with the first referendum. But the question the Leader of the Opposition isn't answering and needs to answer is, how long does he expect the primary legislation to take? How long does he expect the question testing from the Electoral Commission? How long does he expect the operational preparations to take? And how long does he expect the regulated campaign period to be for? Now, if his position is to have a second referendum, we need answers to those questions, because he risks leaving this Parliament in paralysis because he's not answering how long he wants to delay Brexit for.
Martin Whitfield.
Mr. Speaker, just to clarify a statement that the Secretary of State made earlier about the Bank of England, they were of course comparing the current withdrawal agreement to a no deal rather than the current economy. But to answer my young constituents, could the Secretary of State say whether he has ever sent a letter that he has not had the courtesy to sign?
No.
As I think with all MPs, there are occasions, for example, that I have dictated letters to my parliamentary office, and they have taken as dictated and signed on my behalf.
Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch fawr iawn, Mr Speaker. When you mentioned your activities at 9 o'clock yesterday morning, I was rather hoping that you'd say that the pressing engagement was a very famous Welsh rugby victory in the quarter-final of the World Cup. Slightly fortunate, but a very famous victory nonetheless. When it comes to the more complicated matter of the future trade relations, every single member state of the European Union, including some constituent parts, such as Wallonia in Belgium, will have to endorse the final FTA. The withdrawal agreement and the political declaration makes no mention of the British government having to seek the consent of the Senedd in Cardiff or indeed the Scottish Parliament. So why is it therefore, as things stands, will Wallonia, a constituent part of the Belgian state, have more influence over the future FTA with the EU than Wales and Scotland?
The Honourable raises an important point, actually, as to how, as we take forward the negotiations, we engage with the devolved assemblies. It is a very fair point. It is one we're very keen to address, and I also to recognise that there have been concerns, particularly in terms of the first phase, as to the effectiveness of the JMC in terms of those discussions. One of the things within my own department I changed was to ask officials to engage at official level much more. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, I know, spoke with both the Scottish and Welsh governments in the last day or so. They also, along with the Minister of State within my department, went up to Edinburgh for those meetings. But he raises a very fair point, and it is one that I'm very keen to work with him on.
Sweeney.
Mr Speaker, Parliament voted by an acclamation on Saturday to in effect pass the withdrawal agreement as amended on that motion. So will the Minister now confirm that when the withdrawal agreement bill comes before the House at the various stages of the bill, that the Government will respect if this House does decide to amend it in certain different ways? And we've seen, obviously, a commitment by the Government before to respect the indicative votes. If we see a majority emerge in this House for amendments to that bill, will the Government respect it?
The Honourable Gentleman will get an opportunity to see the withdrawal agreement bill once the two UQs are finished. And in terms of amendments, clearly he'll be aware that the scope of the bill is quite wide, but it will always be for the Chair, the Speaker, or indeed the Chairman of Ways and Means in terms of what amendments are selected.
Geraint Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State has pretended that the government is unable to make economic forecasts of a new Brexit deal on the basis that things may change in the Commission or in the world economic environment. But it is the case, of course, that the Treasury consistently makes forecasts on what the size of the economy would be relative to what it would be if we stayed in the EU versus various scenarios. So clearly what he's saying is false. And what is the case is that projection is approximately a 5% reduction in the size of our economy. When will the Treasury and the government come forward with a detailed analysis of how much poorer the poorest will be, how much more corporation tax businesses will have to pay when they're facing a huge burden of red tape, how will the public accounts be faced, and what will be the impact, so that people can judge what's on the plate, having ordered on the menu, and then vote again in a people's vote, so they get what they order on the menu rather than his garbage.
What I was pointing to is just an economic reality, is that one can set out, and the Treasury frequently does, broad landing zones, but forecasts are inherently difficult because there are so many variables that shape what happens. And to say with absolute certainty where things will be in 2033, which is where the forecast would be trying to determine a precise landing zone, I think is open to significant challenge. And we saw that not just on these benches when the Treasury presented the Cross-Whitehall analysis last November, but it was also on the benches opposite the sort of questions he and others were making.
Thank you. Order. Urgent question. Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland if he'll make a statement on progress to restore devolution in the light of today's decision, extension of the period in which the legal duty to call an Assembly election is removed under Section 2 of the Executive Functions Act of 2019.
Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Secretary Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The period for executive formation under the terms of the Northern Ireland Act, Executive Formation and Exercise of Functions 2018, is due to expire at the end of today, Monday, the 21st of October. So today I have laid before Parliament a statutory instrument to extend the period for executive formation to 13th of January 2020. That has the effect of ensuring that Northern Ireland departments can continue to make decisions in accordance with the Act in the absence of executive ministers. Colleagues should be clear that the Act only provides guidance to the Northern Ireland Civil Service and is no substitute for everyday political decision-making. In reflecting on hundreds of interactions I have had with public sector workers, voluntary workers and members of the public, this continued absence is a huge disappointment. This extension also delays the legal obligation on me to call an Assembly election, but does not prevent me from calling an Assembly election at any time. The political parties have not reached an agreement to get Stormont back up and running, but extending this legal deadline has no bearing on my continuing efforts to restore the executive. And as a result, from tomorrow, in relation to abortion law in Northern Ireland, Sections 58 and 59 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 are repealed, in addition to a moratorium on criminal prosecutions. A new legal framework for lawful access to abortion services in Northern Ireland will be put in place by 31st of March 2020, in line with the 2018 UN CEDAW report. I will be consulting on the new framework very soon. On same-sex marriage and opposite-sex civil partnerships, regulations are to be made no later than 13th of January 2020. There are two key areas we are going to consult on: how to allow for religious same-sex marriage ceremonies, and also the issue of conversion from civil partnership to marriage and vice versa. So we can tailor the regulations appropriately. There will be a short consultation on these two issues before we introduce religious same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. This will not detract from the regulations by 13th of January 2020, providing for civil same-sex marriages and opposite-sex civil partnerships. This means at the latest, the first civil same-sex marriages will take place on the week of Valentine's Day 2020. We also intend to launch a public consultation on a scheme for payments to victims of Troubles-related incidents in the coming days. I'm also determined to ensure that the government delivers on our commitments to broader legacy issues. I cannot understate, Mr. Speaker, the responsibilities of the Northern Ireland parties to finding an accommodation and ensuring the future of the devolved institutions that formed such an essential part of the peace process.
Thank you. Tony Lloyd.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by thanking you for granting this very important urgent question? Both the quantity and the importance of the issues the Secretary of State has already raised with the House indicates how important it is that we have regular dialogue on Northern Ireland. And let me say to government business managers, that hasn't been forthcoming in the level to which we would expect. But can I ask the Secretary of State a number of very specific questions? Brexit, according to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, may still result in the crash-out version. Is the Secretary of State certain that he has already in preparation the necessary legislative changes to bring before this House in the event of that no-deal Brexit? But even if we have Brexit with the deal, is the Secretary of State satisfied that the Northern Ireland Civil Service, under the legislation that exists, have the necessary authority to make the very difficult decisions that they and indeed other agencies may have to make as we move through that Brexit process? And in particular, can he assure the House that the Police Service of Northern Ireland have the resources in the event of any form of civic disturbance? I don't want to emphasise what kind of disturbance there could be, but we may face a period of prolonged public unrest. Does the PSNI have the resources and the capacity to play that role? And will he actually at this stage also rule out, as we had in the past, any idea that the Army could once again be recommitted into Northern Ireland? Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State mentioned the important issues of of abortion and same-sex marriage. Can you tell the House, if Stormont is to return in the period between now and January the 13th, will he work with Stormont to make sure that we have an acceptable solution, since Stormont will, in the post-April the 1st, have the capacity to alter any such law? Will he make sure that, that the processes involved will be ones that Stormont and his department work together to make sure that we can have safe and legal abortion for the women of Northern Ireland in Northern Ireland, and that same-sex marriage can take place in Northern Ireland? Mr. Speaker, in the event that Stormont doesn't return, the Secretary of State needs to plan now for what will happen on January the 13th. We know how quickly time goes by in the context of Northern Ireland, how quickly time has already gone by, 1,000 days plus since Stormont met. The Secretary of State will face a difficult decision, and I would say to him that direct rule is a very unattractive proposition for many, many reasons. He may have to look at the election option to renew the mandate of a Stormont Assembly that hasn't met for so long. But in any event, will he guarantee that he will work with the government, the Irish government in Dublin, to make sure that strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement is one that is respected? But, Mr. Speaker, if I can finish on this point, there is unease across the unionist community about the Prime Minister's decision to change the terms under which consent is given by Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement was very clear about the need to take both communities together through any decision-making around important constitutional issues for Northern Ireland. Does the Secretary of State accept the unease of the unionist community? Does he also accept he now has a duty to work hard to regain that trust, a trust actually, frankly, that has been betrayed by the decisions of Conservative MPs who once were unionists and now have abandoned their erstwhile friends?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of legislation and powers in the case of no deal, I've been very clear, no deal is not a good situation for the United Kingdom, and particularly for Northern Ireland, and I hope now the Prime Minister has secured a deal, we can focus on getting that deal over the line. On the Northern Ireland Civil Service, who I paid tribute to this afternoon, they have been the most dedicated civil servants in pushing forward across a range of areas without political decision-making. I believe they do have some powers and political decision guidance from this bill, but it's inadequate, and we need to get Stormont back up and running in order to ensure that they have the political direction that they need. On PSNI and security, the government has invested a further £20 million, or nearly £20 million, and stands ready to continue to support the PSNI financially. I'm obviously responsible in this role for security. This is a sensitive period with police officers under threat day in, day out, but I am comforted that the PSNI is well resourced and I think is doing an exceptional job. And I will keep that monitored and keep in touch with the honourable gentleman in that regard. On the question of the Army, I don't see that any need for any circumstance for the British Army operating in that way. The PSNI are doing all of the functions along with our security services in an exceptional manner. On abortion and same-sex marriage, there is clearly this concern about how does the Assembly now the law is changing, how does it influence? It can influence, but we need to be clear the law from tomorrow has changed across those two areas, and we will hear the views of the Assembly and we will work with them, but the law from tomorrow has changed. On the issue of Stormont return, and if it doesn't return, the consequences of Stormont not getting back up and running are, I think, too profound to consider. We have to get this institution back up and running. Powers from Westminster will involve working with Dublin, will involve a whole range of issues that we shouldn't be having to address. Those men and women who work so hard for peace in Northern Ireland need and continue to remind us that we have to get Stormont back up and running. And I'll be working, as I've been working over the summer, to get, along with the Irish government, to get this crucial institution running again. On the issue of consent, this protocol has been subject to huge debate over the last few days. We've got to remember that one of the biggest criticisms of the last withdrawal agreement was the fact that it needed more say for Northern Ireland. It will have no impact on the petition of concern, on the day-to-day operation of the Assembly. This is an exceptional matter. It is a reserved matter consulting the Assembly. We will be doing everything we can to ensure we make that clear. I've been speaking to members of the unionist community across the weekend, but we do need to ensure that we now get this deal over the line for the United Kingdom and for Northern Ireland.
Order. Order. Momentarily, we will continue with the exchanges on the urgent question. Nominations closed at 5 o'clock this afternoon for candidates for the post of Chair of the Backbench Business Committee. One nomination has been received. A ballot will therefore not be held. I congratulate, and I hope the House will join me in congratulating the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Gateshead, Mr Ian Mearns, on his re-election as Chair of the Backbench Business Committee. The assiduity and public-spiritedness of the Honourable Gentleman are renowned throughout the House. Thank you. 4 nominations were received for the post of Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, and a ballot will be held between 10 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. on the 23rd of October in Committee Room 15. Order. The Chair of the Select Committee, Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Northern Ireland clearly want to see Stormont back up and running because they're seeing their health, their education and their welfare suffer. But by making this extension, the Secretary of State has provided a window, Mr. Speaker, which could possibly see this House overcome the hurdle which seems insurmountable for the parties in Northern Ireland, and that is to legislate for the Irish Language Act, therefore taking it out of the debate between the principal parties in Northern Ireland, and in my judgment removing the hurdle, which is the roadblock, sorry for mixing my metaphors, to getting Stormont back up and running.
Mr. Speaker, the Irish Language Act is one of a number of issues that are being discussed in the talks process. I'd say again, I think the most important and the best way to resolve these issues is through the Stormont talks, and I will continue to work at pace with the Taoiseach to ensure that we encourage parties to come back together and get back into an executive.
3 statements to follow, so we do need to expedite progress, and Gavin Newlands can lead us in that mission. Mr. Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stormont, and more importantly, the people of Northern Ireland have now been without a functioning executive for over 1,000 days. In the Government's report on executive formation, it stated that the UK Government, working closely with the Irish Government, will now intensify its efforts to put compromise solutions to the parties. Mr. Speaker, there are no formal talks between the parties at the moment. Now, I fully accept that the Government cannot bind the hands of the parties involved, but can the Secretary of State tell us, with no current talks, what exactly the Government meant by intensifying efforts, and can he tell us when fresh party talks will take place? The Government's reckless Brexit policy and its agreement with the DUP has severely undermined the delicate balance of relationships that are built and sustained the Good Friday Agreement. But given the breakdown in the Government's relationship with the DUP, does he envisage this will have an impact on efforts to restore the Assembly and Executive? And finally, Mr. Speaker, the Government has confirmed the imposition of direct rule as being considered. This is deeply disappointing. It is clear that devolved decisions are best made by the elected politicians of Northern Ireland, and I urge them to get back round the table and to get back to work.
Mr. Speaker, I have been personally meeting with the parties since taking on this job almost on a weekly basis. But as my honourable friend has acknowledged, this is an issue for the 5 parties, and it is ultimately up to those parties to come together, and both the Irish government and the British government stand ready with ideas, with thoughts, in order to make that happen. On the relationship between the government and the DUP, as you know, my responsibilities, Mr. Speaker, are for all parties and across in Northern Ireland. But I have a good relationship with the DUP. I will continue to support the union to the very best of my ability, and along with all members of this House. On the issue of direct rule, I couldn't have been clearer that Stormont and local decision making is my priority and the best way, in my view, for Northern Ireland to move forward.
Yes, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Owen Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I totally sympathise with the Secretary and his predecessor, who time and again come to this chamber, say we want to see the institutions up and running, which we all do. But we see today, with the manner in which the meeting broke up in disarray in less than an hour, the task that faces him. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we see outcomes of public services in Northern Ireland falling behind the rest of the UK, and we all in this chamber have a responsibility to all citizens across the UK. And I just wonder, the Shadow Secretary said quite rightly, direct rule is the most unattractive option. But we do have a responsibility to see good services delivered. And I just wonder what steps the Secretary of State is taking to possibly prepare to take more power into his own hands to ensure that citizens of Northern Ireland get the services they deserve.
Mr. Speaker, we are prepared for all eventualities, but on the issue of all-party talks, I genuinely believe that whether it's Sinn Féin, whether it's the DUP, we are not too far away, and we have to do everything we can to encourage parties to come together in the best interests of Northern Ireland and to secure an executive.
Looking at the number of colleagues wanting to participate, we should be able to move on by 5:40 if people ask questions rather than give great speeches. Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has outlined a number of areas where action is now going to be taken as a result of the Act, but on health, education, crime, policing, investment and all the rest of it, still the government sits in its hands and allows no government for Northern Ireland. Is he now realising that with Brexit coming, that we have to have powers in the hands of ministers, whether in the Assembly or here? You can't go on abdicating that decision. And today in Belfast, Assembly members did meet. The Sinn Féin boycotted it. Given that the Prime Minister said on Saturday that a simple majority should apply in Northern Ireland as well, fully compatible with the Good Friday Agreement, can he apply that principle to the formation of the Executive? Because 4 parties out of 5 would set it up tomorrow.
Mr. Speaker, just to be very clear on the Assembly, the petition of concern and the arrangements for the Assembly will not change under this scenario. I think, I say again, we need Sinn Féin, the DUP, all parties to come together, because powers from here is not the solution to this issue.
The original author of the handbook on succinct questions, Sir John Redwood.
The DUP is understandably very unhappy about the customs and single market arrangements in the agreement. So will the government table a free trade agreement and get on with it? Because that would help.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not responsible for the European negotiations.
Mr. David Hanson.
Given the creation of a new border down the Irish Sea, which will impact upon services in businesses in Ireland and in North Wales and indeed in the rest of the United Kingdom, what impact assessment has the Secretary of State asked to be produced by the Executive to be shared with political parties on the outcome of that border?
Mr. Speaker, on the issue of customs and the protocol, we will be doing everything to work with Northern Ireland businesses to ensure we deliver on unfettered access as we push this bill through the House of Commons. I spoke to Northern Ireland businesses today and will be engaging with them on an ongoing basis as we move forward with the protocol.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the absence of an Assembly and Executive, the Historical Abuse Bill has had to be passed through this place, and second reading is in the House of Lords next week. Can I ask the Secretary of State what will happen to that bill should the Assembly be restored? Will we continue with that so that the victims get the compensation they need as soon as possible?
Secretary of State.
I hope that we will and expect that we will continue with that bill to deliver to victims who have waited far too long.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State confirm, as revealed by the Brexit Secretary in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, that under the new Brexit dispensation, firms in Northern Ireland exporting to the rest of the UK will now be expected to fill in export forms? And could he tell us how that can be squared with the claim that Northern Ireland will remain part of the UK customs territory?
Mr. Speaker, as Northern Ireland Secretary, I will be fighting for the interests of business and ensuring that we minimise any disruption. To their trade flows. Northern Ireland has a hugely successful business sector, and it will go from strength to strength with this deal.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful. Just following up on the question from the right honourable member for North Belfast, and also from my honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee. My understanding is that 4 of the 5 parties in Northern Ireland would like the executive to be reformed, and it's only Sinn Féin which is holding out for at least the reason my honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee, set out, if not others. What does the Secretary of State think is going to change to enable Sinn Féin to be persuaded to restore the executive? I listened carefully to what he said, and I accept he's working incredibly hard, but I'm still not clear about what is going to change to enable the executive to be reformed and for Northern Ireland to be able to enjoy devolved government.
Mr. Speaker, Sinn Féin, as with other parties, have been engaging very positively with me, and I have had good conversations with their senior leaders. I think in terms of change, as this House makes a positive decision on Brexit, I think that in the coming days, I think that is a significant change, and that could be the catalyst for further movement on these talks.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot emphasise enough to the Secretary of State how important the principle of consent is to unionists. And the idea that a decision of the momentous nature of the one we will be expected to take in 4 years' time does not reflect adequately the principle of consent as expressed in the Belfast Agreement has serious implications for our ability to support the restoration of devolution without that safeguard. And I say with all seriousness to the Secretary of State, if this issue is not addressed, it goes well beyond this Brexit deal.
Mr. Speaker, I say again to my colleagues and friends in the DUP and to unionists across this House and in Northern Ireland, this protocol is for a reserved matter. It is not for the Assembly. The Belfast Agreement is extremely clear that there will be matters which will not be subject to the consent mechanisms in the Assembly. The government will continue to work to ensure that this protocol, as the bill goes through Parliament, is executed in a way which is reassuring to all members and all parts of the Northern Ireland community. But remember, the issue with the backstop was a lack of consent. This consent mechanism is intended to deal with it, but it has no effect on the Northern Ireland Assembly.
That service personnel, their families and service veterans are losing out under the terms of the Armed Forces Covenant not being fully applied in Northern Ireland. Will the Secretary of State give consideration to the recommendation made in a recent report by the Defence Select Committee that the Northern Ireland Civil Service should appoint someone directly to sit on the Veterans Board that administers the Covenant?
I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for that report and for his committee's thinking in this area, and I am giving consideration to that report and how we can execute parts of that report in a positive manner to ensure that we deliver to the armed forces who served in Northern Ireland.
Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, the creation of a customs border down the Irish Sea and the necessary declarations that we now hear will be necessary as a consequence of that is something about which Ruth Davidson and his right honourable friend, the former Secretary of State for Scotland, warned last year. They said then, and it's true now, that it will undermine the Union. Why is the Secretary of State disregarding his right honourable friend's advice?
Secretary of State.
I'm not disregarding the advice of anybody, but this is a deal that protects the border. This was a key priority for me as Secretary of State. It protects the peace process. The economy of Northern Ireland, I think, will benefit from this deal. We're delivering on Brexit, but protecting the economy, protecting the peace process. And this mechanism, I say again, has no bearing on the Assembly, and I will work over the implementation period with colleagues across government to minimise any problems for Northern Ireland businesses in exporting and selling into Great Britain.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're supposed to live in a democracy, and yet 7 out of the 18 constituencies in Northern Ireland have no representation in this place. And as we've heard, the Assembly has not functioned for getting on for 3 years. Surely it's time to end the prospect of one party being able to bring down the whole institution. Will the Secretary of State consider introducing legislation which stops that from happening again?
Secretary of State.
I think I have no plans for changing the constitution and set-up and basis of the Assembly. I do, however, think that the lack of representation here, 7, 8 constituencies unrepresented, is not a good thing. And also, as I've said earlier, we need to get Stormont up and running. 1,000 days is far too long.
Kate Hoey.
The Secretary of State should be an expert on the protocol. So could I ask him this simple question? It's a friend who gardens. In Northern Ireland, if he buys £2 of organic garlic from a supplier in England, when they see the Northern Ireland address, will they then be obligated to add on the EU tariff, which is currently 10%? And how would he prove he's not moving it to the EU in the Republic? And how would he reclaim the tariff? The agreement says the default assumption is that it is going to the EU, and that's a very important question. That's what people are talking about in Northern Ireland today, not restoring devolution.
As my honourable friend knows, the joint committee in that new protocol will look at all these matters, and these are matters that I expect to be looked at over the coming months as we go through the implementation period.
Eddie Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my view that if the Act is extended by a statutory instrument, that will not be a good outcome for the people of Northern Ireland?
I agree with my honourable friend.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. As members of the Legislative Assembly at Stormont continue to be unable to fulfil their full responsibilities, what consideration has the Secretary of State given to cutting their salaries yet again? The fact that they receive their salaries, albeit reduced, has caused immense annoyance and continues to cause immense annoyance across Northern Ireland, and has cost millions of pounds. So does the Secretary of State intend to cut them?
I plan to review all elements relating to the Assembly if we're unable to move things forward over the coming days.
Paul Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Post-Brexit, the Northern Ireland Assembly is going to have to take some incredibly serious and important decisions about Northern Ireland's future. Does the kind of shambolic scenes we saw on the Assembly this morning suggest that that institution is actually up to that task? And if not, and if it is not restored, is he happy that he and his department have all the powers necessary in order to take Northern Ireland through the transition and into the immediate period after we've left the EU?
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I think that the parties and the individuals who will play a part in the Assembly and the Executive when it gets up and running again are of extremely high quality. I think there's every opportunity for us to get this up and running and for it to go from strength to strength. I think this is so much more in the best interests of Northern Ireland than taking powers or restoring powers from here.
Call him again.
Mr. Speaker, it's rare these days that a decision made by this House provokes joy and hope, but it will today amongst thousands of people in Northern Ireland who love each other, are in a same-sex relationship and finally will be able to marry the person that they love. But they will be concerned to hear that despite the will of this House to introduce equal marriage to Northern Ireland, not in any segmented form, that those who have had civil partnerships may be forced to delay their conversion into full equal marriage. Can the Secretary of State confirm that this will not be the case, and that as of the 13th of January, all couples in Northern Ireland who love each other will be able to get married?
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the start of my statement, we will be consulting on religious same-sex marriage and the conversion of civil partnership to marriage. But for all other same-sex marriages, they will be delivered as per the regulations. And again, the first ones will be taking place on the week of Valentine's Day.
Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has expressed, and I think everybody in this place today has expressed, their concern with the current situation. But after 1,000 days, it does seem like we are in just as bad a position as ever. So what exactly is it that gives the Secretary of State confidence that we are about to find a resolution to this and that devolution will be restored to Stormont in the near future?
Well, having been Government Chief Whip during most of the Brexit period, 1,000 days does not appear quite as bad as it does to others, but it is an awful long time, and we do need to make sure that we now encourage the parties to get back into the executive. The Taoiseach and I stand ready and plan to work with the parties over the coming days.
Dr. Roberta Blackman-Woods.
Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State confirm that he will bring forward new legislation on abortion in Northern Ireland promptly? And can he say a little bit more about the process he'll adopt in doing so?
Mr. Speaker, we will be bringing forward a consultation over the coming days. As I said, the decriminalisation and the moratorium on criminal cases takes place from tomorrow, and we will be delivering on the law that now has changed in the new year.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Assembly, as the Secretary of State will know, tried to meet today. Some 33 plus members tried to initiate a debate to stop the abortion legislation going forward in Northern Ireland. The Secretary of State will know that. Unfortunately, government acquiesced to the legislation and made sure it went through here. Does the Secretary of State not understand that the anger that people in Northern Ireland have because of the abortion change, and would he bring in changes for the Health Department, which is going to be £20 million in deficit this year, to ensure that they can operate and do what they need to do in the Health Department in the year ahead?
So I understand the huge sensitivities with regard to this issue, but there was a free vote in this House. The law was clear that for both same-sex marriage and abortion, if the Assembly and Executive weren't up and running by today, then the law would change. And I think we have now reached that point. In terms of funding for abortions, the government will continue to pay for travel costs to England during this period. And going forward, we will make sure, as part of the consultation, as part of the changes, that we do ensure that the health service in Northern Ireland has every resource it requires.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Whilst we urge for a quick and speedy resolution to the impasse in Northern Ireland's restoration of the devolution settlement, does the Minister actually welcome the levelling up of fundamental human rights across all parts of the United Kingdom, and the sort of a liberal grandstanding we saw today was actually most unwelcome and counterproductive?
Mr. Speaker, I say again, I think these are sensitive issues. These are free vote issues. But the law has changed, and this government now will follow through and deliver on it.
Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these responses are calamitous. For the Secretary of State to hold up a copy of the Belfast Agreement, yet not having appraised himself with Strand 2, paragraph 12, or Strand 1, 5b, which outlined further expansion of North-South arrangements subject to the Assembly consent, and 5b indicating how that consent operates. That's right. It is an outrage. And whilst he said to the BBC last Thursday that no party would have a veto, Sinn Féin operated their veto on the restoration of the institutions today and have done for the last 1,000 days, and the EU will have a veto in this joint committee. Can he answer that question that was asked earlier? Is it the case that Northern Ireland goods will require customs declarations to enter what is supposed to be unfettered access to the rest of their own country?
So on the first point, Mr. Speaker, I say again to my honourable friend, there is no change to the Constitutional Assembly. This is an accepted matter, and it's a reserved matter, and we will do everything we can to deliver on assuaging many of the concerns that have been raised. On the issue of checks and forms and unfettered access is a key part of this protocol, and I'll be working to ensure that we deliver on that in the interest of Northern Ireland business over the coming weeks.
Order. Statement, the business statement. The Lord President of the Council and Leader of the House of Commons. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the decision of the House on Saturday, the 19th October, I should like to make an announcement regarding the business for the remainder of this week. Tuesday, the 22nd of October, second reading of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill, followed by commencement of committee of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Wednesday, the 23rd of October, continuation of proceedings on the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Thursday, the 24th of October, conclusion of proceedings on the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Friday, the 25th of October, the House will not be sitting.
Thank you. Order. I'll call in a moment the shadow leader, who doubtless will have a prepared contribution, but I must emphasise to the House that I regard this as a relatively narrow business statement, and I would gently discourage colleagues from expatiating on a vast miscellany of matters which they could happily do on Thursday. Let's keep it narrow, because that's what it should be. The shadow leader, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I do want to start, because this is the first opportunity that I have had on behalf of the opposition to thank the Clerk of the House as the senior accounting officer responsible for the House, and all the House staff and the doorkeepers and the security officers for looking after us and enabling the House to get together on Saturday to do our work, and also the police and security services who've escorted right honourable and honourable members and their families on their way home and keeping us safe. Can I thank the leader for the business statement? I was obviously disappointed that the leader didn't give me notice on Saturday that he was going to make a point of order. He will know that a point of order is not the way to alter business. It's a procedural motion of the House on which Mr. Speaker can rule. So it would have been helpful if the Leader of the House could have done so. He will know that on that historic day, 24 points of order on his point of order were made. And my first question to him would be, why did he leave the chamber when he couldn't hear the rest of the points of orders? He will need to know he is the voice of the House in government. Can I ask him also, because he hasn't mentioned when we're going to have those important debates on the Queen's speech, which were scheduled for Monday and Tuesday. I know that the government don't appear to care about the NHS or the economy. We on this side think they're very important topics. This all could have been done in an orderly manner, so could the Leader of the House please say when those, the remainder of the Queen's speech will be scheduled? The Withdrawal Agreement Bill is a crucial bill. It's vital that it receives a proper scrutiny of the House. So could the Leader of the House say when exactly the bill will be published? And it's not right that the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union says it has anything to do with an urgent question. The bill should be published in a timely manner so that it receives proper scrutiny of the House. And when will the programme motion be put forward? Could the Leader of the House also confirm that the government has no plans to pull the Withdrawal Agreement Bill and that it will be voted on if and as amended? Now, this whole process could have been conducted in an orderly manner. He will know that there is an appropriate way through the usual channels to fix the business of the House. At every stage, Mr. Speaker, the government has been running scared of this House and democracy, and it's now attempting to force through a flawed Brexit deal which sells out people's jobs, rights and our communities.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady is absolutely right to thank the Clerk and the staff of this House, who were all absolutely magnificent. I will reiterate what I said before. that every member of my private office volunteered to come in on Saturday, and I think that is simply an example of the commitment to the House of Commons that we see from all our staff, and it is really rather wonderful that so many people who work here appreciate and value the Houses of Parliament and have the historic understanding of what a privilege it is to be here. May I add my thanks, and joining the Right Honourable Lady, to the police for the escorts they provided to get people home, including me. I've had many really very kind inquiries about my son. He is a 12-year-old boy. He found nothing more exciting than being escorted home by the police. I'm not sure he should have found it so exciting, but he did. But as a really serious point, I think it is very important that honourable and right honourable members can come and go from the precincts of Parliament feeling safe. And we must think about whether there is more we need to do and whether sessional orders may be helpful in that regard. But all honourable and right honourable members are representing 70,000, sometimes more, constituents and must be able to come here and go without any feeling that they are under any pressure from any group outside Parliament. The Right Honourable Lady refers to my point of order on Saturday. As you all know, there's long-standing precedent for this. One of the examples actually by my late godfather, Norman St. John Stevens, in 1980. A more recent one by my Right Honourable friend, the member of Epsom and Ewell, and one only in September by my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister. But also, the Right Honourable Ladies, I'm sure aware, as are you, Mr. Speaker, of page 408 of Erskine May, that gives the Speaker discretion to turn a substantive point of order into a statement had he so wished. Mr. Speaker did not so wish, and therefore I made 2 points of order to help the House and to understand what the business would be today, with, of course, the promise of a full statement today, which is exactly what is happening. And there are going to be occasions when business changes in response to votes. That is a perfectly normal system within this House. On the Queen's speech, yes, of course we will come back to the Queen's speech, but we do have a deadline of the 31st of October, a deadline set in law for dealing with our departure from the European Union, and we need to have the legislation in place by then, or the alternative is that we leave without a deal. The Right Honourable Lady asked about the bill. Well, I know there is... I'm sorry, speak up. Oh, the Right Honourable Lady asked why I left the chamber. That's extremely straightforward. Matters of points of order are for the chair. They're not for the leader of the House. It would be an impertinence of me to think that I could possibly know more than Mr. Speaker about the proceedings and order of this House. And I would not like to give the impression of having knowledge that I could not pretend to have. It is for Mr. Speaker to rule on points of order, not for other honourable members. I had made my point of order and listened to several other points of order, but there were no further opportunities for me to speak because it was a matter for the chair. The bill will be published very shortly. The presentation of bill will be the first item of public business when we come on to the business of the day, and at that point, simultaneously as if by magic, the bill will appear in the vote office for honourable and right honourable members to peruse, and I'm sure they will enjoy that. The programme motion will be down tonight in an orderly way. Well, I hope it will be an orderly way. Mr. Speaker will rule on that. If it's not, for debate tomorrow, and the bill, of course, won't be pulled. But the Right Honourable Lady is one of the most charming members of this House, has enormous grace and thoughtfulness. But when she said we were running scared of democracy, I think she must have been trying to pull our collective legs, Mr. Speaker. It is this government that has offered a general election not just once, but twice. I mean, how frightened is that of democracy? We are so terrified of the voters that we want them to have the chance to vote, so scared that we feel that they should be allowed to go to the ballot box. No. If there is any scaredness, if there is any frightenedness, if anybody is frit, Mr. Speaker, they're on the opposition benches.
Let me endorse what the Leader of the House said in all solemnity about the absolute and precious right of members of this place and of staff to go about their business safely and unimpeded. That has to be an absolute and non-negotiable. And where that right has been threatened, that threat is to be unequivocally condemned. And sometimes I fear that people think that one form of hollering or protest is acceptable and another is not. The truth is that no such behaviour, which could be intimidating or threatening or worse, can possibly be justified in our democracy. I note what the leader said more widely about points of order. Points of order are a matter for response by the chair. It was not, nevertheless, an obligation of the leader to beetle out of the chamber during the said points of order, given that most of them were proxies for commentaries upon his own. Nevertheless, I note what he said. There was no disinclination on my part for there to be an emergency business statement. I had rather thought that that was what the leader was going to proffer, and therefore there was just a genuine misunderstanding between us on that point. But I ascribe no ulterior motive to the leader, and I know that he would not to me. Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Can I, however, press the leader on the House as to when we will have the conclusion of the Queen's speech? We've always known the 31st of October was a date, and we always knew when the Queen's speech was going to be, and presumably that was at the timing of the government's agreement with the Palace. The fact is that Parliament has spent the best part of 3 years now discussing what it doesn't want. It is time for us to move on. I welcome a business statement today. Will we